Call to order, madam. It's going to be interesting. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the Building Board of March 29th, 2012. Note that it's 3 minutes late because the chairman was untimely in starting this meeting. Madam Secretary, would you please call a roll call, please?
Mr. Steele,
Here.
Mr. Straight,
Present.
Mr. Frieden,
Here.
Ms. O'Donnell, Mr. Brigham,
Here.
Mr. Michelson,
Here.
Mr. Gray,
Here.
Mr. Looney, Mr. Merchant, Mr. Boney,
Here.
Mr. Feller. All are present.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. With that, I'd like to welcome, I believe Mr. Gray and Mr. Straight are new. I'd like both of them to introduce themselves and just tell us your field. I think, have you done that already? Could you please do that? We'll start with you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Sterling Straight. I'm honored to be a part of this board. I'm a structural engineer working at WH Pacific. I've been there about 6 years now. Done projects in municipality of Anchorage as well as throughout the state. And like I say, I'm honored to be part of this board and to help out with the process.
Thank you, and we welcome you and welcome the knowledge you bring to the table. Sir, somebody down here is new, right?
Mr. Gray.
Mr. Gray is not, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Gray, you moved on me according to this. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Barry Gray. I'm a superintendent with Superior Plumbing and Heating. I've been in the trade for 19 years. I sit on several other boards and panels in different organizations. My knowledge in plumbing is great. I really enjoy what I do. Member of IAPMO, I keep up on issues with that in current code. And I'm honored to be sitting on the board.
Thank you. We welcome you. Have you, both of you met everybody on the board? In case you haven't, I'd like to start off with Mr. Steele. You heard the names called, but I don't know if you know who they are. Mr. Steele, if you could just, you don't have to tell us what you do. You can if you want. But if you'll introduce yourself and everybody just go right down the line so they put a name to a face.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I could ask your indulgence, it would be helpful tonight if everyone does explain what it is they do for a living, because we're going to be setting up 3-member panels later based on
Fine,
that.
Madam Building Official will do that. Thank you. I see I'm going to get corrected a lot tonight, but that's okay. Go ahead, Mr. Steele.
Yes, I'm Jonathan Steele. I'm an architect. I've been living and practicing in Anchorage since 1979. Currently employed with the firm Bettisworth North.
Thank you.
I'm Craig Fredine, mechanical engineer on the board. I've been mechanical engineer for 15 years now in Alaska, and I'm currently employed with PDC Engineers.
Thank you.
I'm Serena O'Donnell, Willowdale Enterprises. We're a commercial general and electrical contractor, and doing that professionally for 12 years.
Thank you.
Skip Ringman, Alcan Electric, co-owner. Been an electrician since 1983, so long time.
Long time. Thank you. My name is Paul Michelson, your current chair, owner of Michelson and Daughter Construction. I've been building houses in Anchorage since 1977. I currently sit on the ICC's Board of Plumbing and Mechanical. I sat on ICC's board for fire and life safety, the IBC code and the IRC code. Associated with National Association of Home Builders, sit on several of their code review committees, and I've been a member of the building board as long as Mr. Steele there. John, we've been on about 14, 15 years?
Feels like it.
Feels like it. And it's a pleasure to serve you all. Welcome.
Rob Merchant with More Heating, owner of More Heating, and I've been doing this mechanical trade for 19 years now, and really do enjoy it. I sit on Anchorage Home Builders Board as part of the code review board for IFDC and IMC, and actually, it's a pleasure to serve this board. This has been a very good board to serve with.
Thank you.
I'm Scott Boney. I'm an architect and a principal with RIM Architects. I've been practicing architecture up here for 30 years now. I think this is about my third cycle through the building board, and I enjoy this one as it is actually a productive board to get a lot done. I've sat on the IBC review committee and the elevator review, code review committees.
Welcome.
My name's Troy Feller. I'm a structural engineer, principal at BBFM Engineers. I've been a structural engineer for 22 years, and 20 years of that in Anchorage.
Thank you. I personally welcome you all. I think this board does a great job. We're going to go for approval of I'm going to entertain a motion for approval of the agenda, but I would like to just, before I do that, just make some suggestions under election of officers and chair. A should really be D. B should be, C should be A, refresh of new member orientation. And then B should be B, Robert's Rules of Order. D, the implementation of AO 2012-31, parentheses S. And then election of officers should be at the end, if anybody's opposed to that. If not, I'd entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I need to point out, point of order, that the order of business for a regularly scheduled meeting is the agenda is set in regulation 2310-010, and that's why your agenda is ordered the way that it is tonight. In terms of the election of officers, just you were all given us a set of this regulation for the last meeting. Do you happen to have it with you? If not, I can read about that, if that would help. And it says, the building board shall each year during the first meeting of March elect a chairman and vice chairman. Shall be the duty of the chairman to preside at all meetings. Shall be the duty of the vice chairman to preside at such times chairman shall be absent, and so on. It does not necessarily say where that needs to be in the agenda, but because it's the first meeting and it's for this year, going from practice of other boards and commissions, maybe Mr. Weaver can help me with that. Typically, the officers are elected at the beginning of the meeting in
Well,
which they'll begin.
Madam Building Official, we've never done that. I appreciate your point of order, but we are running the meeting, and we have a motion as presented, and if we have a second, then we'll proceed in that. The election of officers will take place tonight. It does not say it has to take place in the beginning.
I'll make a second if the second hasn't been made.
Second, we've had a motion, we have a second. All those in favor, please signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The agenda's been accepted. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of February 21st, 2012.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
We've got a 10-page document that we haven't had a chance to really review on this. I would like to suggest that we not approve these right now, that we have a chance to look at these, and we could actually approve these by electronic ballot over the next week.
Is that in the form of a motion, Mr. Boney?
I'll make that a motion.
Do I have a second? Motion's been made, and it's been seconded. I'll accept it. So your motion is to defer acceptance of the minutes from February 21st, 2012, and vote on it. You want to put a date on that, Mr. Boney?
I mentioned 1 week.
1 week, 7 days from today, so next Thursday would be April, 4th? Does that sound right? Anybody have a phone or something?
You wanna speak to that?
First day of the Masters.
I believe it's the 5th,
It's the
Chairman.
5th? Okay, so everybody will respond via email?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
point of order. This particular board cannot do business electronically or telephonically, so you should probably just carry your minutes over to the next meeting then.
I will seek Mr. Wheeler's attention on that. In the past, we have voted telephonically and we voted electronically. So, Mr. Boney, would you like to, for the point of tonight's discussion, would you like to make a motion saying that we carry the minutes over till the next meeting? I think we can do it telephonically, and I'll have an answer on that tomorrow after speaking to the attorney.
I would accept that, yes.
Will the second accept that? Somebody over here made second.
I'll say yes, but
Mr. Merchant, you second it? Would you accept that? Okay. Motion's been made and seconded that we carry the minutes from February 21st, 2012 over till the next scheduled meeting, not knowing when that's going to be. And I will find out from the attorney if we can electronically vote on that. If we can, I'll have,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call a question.
yes, call the question. All those in favor of that, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Public hearings, there is none tonight. Appearance request, Mr. Lee, I see you're in the room, and another gentleman. Do either one of you want to speak tonight? Not me. Thank you very much. Unfinished business, I don't know if we have any carryover. Do we have any carryover business from last meeting? We don't seem to have any. Under new business, we have refresher of new members. Orientation, Madam Building Official, do you want to refresh and talk with the new members here, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have some materials for you, especially for the newer members, but it's also a refresher for some of the longer-standing members. You should have received, prior to our, in the packet for the February meeting, you should have received a copy of AMCR 2310, which does speak to the orders of business and it's the regulation governing the operations of the board. So you should all have that. If you have misplaced it or need another copy, we can certainly get it for you. You can also find it online. So you should have that, and we'll refer to some of that later tonight. And I would just say it would be a good idea to maintain some of that stuff from meeting to meeting. We would ask that you do that so we're not making copies, each meeting. Okay, other items that we have here for you is the Robert's Rules of Order, which we can go into, and we can go into it in detail, or you can review it at your leisure, but we wanted to make sure you had a copy of that. We also have for you a two-page front and back outline of board and commission and committee member responsibilities. It's generic. It's not specifically designed for this board, but it's a very good overall reminder of the context of the responsibilities in serving on a board like this. We also have a booking slip that shows that we have reserved this conference room for the dates shown on the slip. It is important if the code does allow for, or the regulation allows for scheduled meetings to be canceled if there's not specific business to be handled. The regulations do require the first meeting, require a business meeting in March, which we were able to, which is what we're doing tonight. And special meetings may also be called at the request of the chair. But meetings can also be canceled if there's not business to be taken up. That's an important thing to note because if we cancel a meeting, we do pay rent. Municipality has to actually pay rent for this room, or Development Services has to pay rent to use this room. We understand that the board prefers to meet in this room rather than over at our offices. It's more formal and more suited to the gravity of the issues you may have to face, or public hearings or whatnot. So staff's on board with that, but do be aware, if we aren't having meetings, we need to cancel them ahead of time so that we're not charged for the room. So that's your available meeting dates for you, essentially, is what this is.
Ms. Walsh, what's the lead time on cancellation of a meeting? Like say, do we pay rent at the mayor's conference room?
No, I believe the assembly chambers are the only ones who rent it. Maybe Ms. Klender can answer that question.
We don't pay. If it's in a municipal building, we don't have to pay. If it's like the Lusac Library, we do have to pay.
Okay, then the question, the lead time, so we're supposed to meet, argument's sake, on April 5th. If we don't know, I mean, can we cancel it 2 days without development service paying for it, or do we need 2 weeks ahead of time, or what's the lead time before we have to pay for the space?
They'd like it sooner than better, but if they have 2 days' notice, that is still okay.
2 days, okay.
Okay. Shall I continue?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the other item you have before you is the seating chart, which has been modified tonight because of a little mix-up, and we had several members seated and realized that Mr. Straight did not have a computer, or that there weren't enough computers on the left side of the room. So for this evening, Mr. Straight is sitting to Mr. Steele's right. But this is the seating order, and the change will be, if there is a change of officers tonight, then if there is a different chair, that person will always sits to the left of the recording secretary, and we'll swap out that person with whoever may end up as the chair. So that's your seating chart. I think most of you got an orientation to the building if you haven't been here before. The break room and whatnot on this side. And that's important to know about if there should be a case of a conflict of interest, which is also described in your regulations that we gave you last meeting. My understanding that you're supposed to remove yourself from the room, and most people go to the break room because the audio is piped in there and you can hear what's going on, but you're not supposed to be in the room if you have a conflict of interest. That's sort of a brief overview. Would you like to take any time to go through any of these items in detail, Mr. Chair?
Not at this time. On the conflict of interest, in the past, this board has, well, I don't think we've ever had, Scott, you've been here a long time. I don't know if we've ever had a conflict of interest, but no one's ever left the room. They've just abstained from voting and testifying, but no one's ever left the room.
The one I remember, the individual wasn't permitted to testify, but did not leave the room.
Right.
And as I read the regulations, I'd have to read them again, but I'm not exactly sure why they were not allowed to testify.
Correct. So, again, I guess that's two questions to ask, but any other questions from this panel of Ms. Walsh?
Mr. Chair, if I may, the things I would like you to, would encourage you to, when you have a moment to look at your AMCR 2310 rules of procedure, that you note the jurisdiction issues have been, let me put it this way, code is more stringent than regulation. Code trumps regulations. So there are some conflicts with the new ordinance that's come in, a couple of minor ones, and just keep that in mind, that code will trump over the regulation. But I would like to point out to you, it does give requirements for establishing case files for appeals. It lists the requirements for your packet material. It discusses ex parte communication, which is very important because that can cause a problem to a case if there's ex parte communication. I encourage you to read that and what that means in terms of what you're allowed to speak about with others and not. It does define conflict of interest, issues where there may be a conflict of interest, and also addresses disclosure where there may be a minor relationship or something that, you should disclose, but the board may still vote to direct you to participate. Also, talks about orders of business, which is you can look at your leisure. But the ex parte contact and the conflict of interest rules are pretty important, and I would encourage you to familiarize yourself with those or refresh if you've read them once before.
I believe most on the board have, and I appreciate the bringing that up again. The members of this board have always decided whether someone has a conflict of interest based on what the individual tells us. Are you under the agreement that that's the way it's going to be in the future?
Well, again, would you like to speak to that, Mr. Weaver?
Actually, Mr. Chairman, there are some, the Assembly has some standard protocols as to how they determine conflict of interest. We've used that with the other regulatory boards and commissions, and we'll get you those criteria. But they basically ask 3 or 4 different questions.
Because I believe most of the people on this board probably are familiar with or have met every anticipated appellant I could think of in town. So just because you've met or known someone doesn't necessarily give you a conflict of interest.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. It's a small community. All the boards and commissions have this issue. Really, what they're looking for is a direct financial conflict of interest.
Correct.
And then you get into the degree of, how much do you know this person? Can you make an impartial, unbiased decision? But we'll get you those criteria that'll make it easier for you to go through that.
And again, actually, you have those criteria from your packet of last month. It's 2310-009. We can get you more copies if you've misplaced what we gave you last time.
Thank you. Is that complete? The refresher orientation?
Unless you have further questions, that completes it.
Anybody have any questions for Ms. Walsh? Seeing none. Robert's Rules, you kind of introduced it. Do you want to talk any more about that, or just let everybody read it on their own?
Mr. Chair, primarily that's provided as a reference. New board members especially, or people who aren't really familiar with Robert's Rules may want to review that on their own. If you have any basic things you'd like to talk about tonight, as the chair, this would be the time in terms of how.
Which Robert Rules does this board work under? Because I've read version 2 and version 3, and they differ slightly.
Well, I would have to tell you, Mr. Chair, I'm not familiar with those differences. So if you do you have a preference?
I think the most current, it changes about every couple of years, just like codes, and they alter a few things. But I was just curious, because I did find it interesting that I was looking up a particular subject for another committee, and I was looking in the old book, and someone handed me a version 3 copy, and it was different. So,
Well, you'll see that the handout in front of you is an internet posting of 9/20/11, so I would presume it's fairly recent.
and I found that the internet, just for your own knowledge also, but the internet differs a lot from the book. The internet is like the short version of the book, and just something to look, I
Mr.
think.
Chair, we'll check with legal and see what they
Yeah,
recommend.
because I found it, because I thought I had all the answers from the internet, and then found out that the answers weren't necessarily correct.
If I may.
Yes.
These versions of the Robert Rules were given to me by the mayor's office
Okay.
to give to the new board members.
Excellent. Thank you. Does that conclude that report, ma'am?
Yes.
Does anybody have any questions for the Robert Rules? Seeing none, hearing none. We're going to go into, would be C, or was D, implementation of AO 2012-31, parentheses, S version, amending Anchorage Municipal Code sections 4.40.030 and 23.10.103.4 to provide for 3-member building board hearing panels, refundable final deposit, discretionary de novo review of hearing panel decisions by the Board of Building Regulations. Would staff like to outline that, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I would like to do is, if you have your copy of the ordinance in front of you, I will skim some of the highlights of that, and then as we go, I'll make some reference to some timing issues. Once we've been all the way through the ordinance, I have a handout that sort of distills it in its staff's attempt to put this in a clear timeline form, especially the appeals process. And I would like to end up with us going through that maybe in more of a work session mode or receive feedback. I've already told the municipal attorney that we have found some conflicts, procedural conflicts that we need to clear up as we walk through this ordinance, and any other conflicts the board may find tonight, we'll get with the municipal attorney and see if we can sort that out. So with your permission, I'll start walking through the ordinance.
Okay.
Okay. The Section 1, the ordinance actually amended two different titles of code. Section 1 is Title 4, which has to do with boards and commissions, and the change is in 440030B. And for those who aren't familiar with the format for ordinances, this is the version that shows the new language. And what you see that is underlined would be new language from the previous version, and then what's in parentheses or brackets is typically something that is deleted. And then this, because this being an S version, some new language was then struck out. And so that's to keep in mind as we go through. If there's questions, we'll be happy to answer. So 440030B changed the board from a pool of or not a pool, the board previously was defined as 11 members, and then the section describes the disciplines those members were intended. Section 2310-1034 describes the disciplines those members are supposed to represent, and we'll get to that in a moment. This new language adds a pool of no fewer than 11 and up to 15 members. So it increases the size of the board, although allows for 11 members to still constitute the board. Moving on to Section 2, these are the specific changes to Title 23, specifically 2310-103.4, which is the powers and duties of the Board of Examiners and Appeals, and you can see that they've also added the word regulation. So your name is now Building Board of Regulation Examiners and Appeals. I'm not sure as to the intent of that change. The general 2310-103.41, the general, it defines jurisdiction, and staff is actually pleased with this addition to the code because previously jurisdiction was defined in the regulation, and this brings that jurisdiction, it clears up the jurisdiction, brings it forward into code. So that is a helpful addition. I don't believe that with the changes there are jurisdictions you already had before in the regulation, so there's nothing actually new there, except that the regulations were so old that it accepted your power to work with mechanical and plumbing regulations. In the past, there were separate boards for that, but and the regulation code hasn't had that change made. So this clarifies that your jurisdiction includes review of mechanical and plumbing issues. Moving on to page 2, Part A is this appeal establishes the appeal panels. And the key words are, in order to hear and decide appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders, the building board shall establish 3-member hearing panels from its pool of members qualified by experience and training to pass upon appeal matters. Additional language. The specifics of that is that up to 5 hearing panels shall be established the first meeting of each calendar year to hear appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders. The secretary to the board, which is defined as myself, and I designate the actual recording duties and so on to Ms. Klender, but in terms of when this refers to secretary to the board. It refers to the building official. And so you'll see that this says that the secretary to the board and the board chair shall assign members to a specific panel. Later in the ordinance at the end, it establishes the first meeting of the calendar year, in this case, to be tonight, 16 days. Well, there's an error in that part too, but the intent of the assembly, I believe, was to make tonight the meeting at which these panels are established. So that's how we're working with it. So we will have an order of business that you may want to, we can jump right into it, but I prefer to do it at the end once we've been through the ordinance issues, establish the actual panels. It says up to 5 panels. We don't have to do 5. We only have 11 board members right now. I think the intent was if you had 15 members, you could have 5 3-member panels. Since we have 11 members, we could have 3 panels and with 2 leftovers and use those people as substitutes, or we could have 4 panels and someone would have to serve on 2 of them. So that's something to keep in mind as we get to the to that part of our work tonight. Of these 3-member panels, and so the first appeal, if a person appeals a decision, it goes to these 3-member panels first. We did have clarification from the legal department about that. There was question about it, and Ms. Klunder has an email from Mr. Wheeler that she can pass out at this time. I'll read it. The question was, it appears to staff that that the applicant must first go to a 3-member panel, and full board only reviews appeals on a de novo basis, which means a second hearing, if the 3-member decision is appealed by either party. The question is, was that true? There wasn't an idea that a person appealing a decision could go straight to the full board if they wish. The ordinance is not written that way, and you'll see Mr. Wheeler's response, who says, I do not see in the code an appeal direct to the full board. That avenue has been eliminated by the new AO. AMC 2310-10341 says the board hears and decides appeals, but subsection A now says that in order to hear those appeals, the board shall establish 3-member hearing panels. So that's the determination that we've had from the legal department.
What she just read is not on here.
I handed out the
What
second
you
one.
just read wasn't on here, and I'm going, wish
I
you read.
apologize. Ms. Klunder has got a lot of papers to work with there, and once in a while, one paper gets on top of another. And we'll get
Just
to,
in the future, Madam, or Ms. Walsh, it'd be nice if we would have gotten all this ahead of time, so we could have had time to read it.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair, but as you'll see, this answer came in at 2:13 p.m., and staff was simply not able to process it quickly enough for you to get it more quickly than tonight. Okay, so that's a major change in your procedures, that now an appeal will go to a 3-member panel first. Okay, moving on. At least 2 members of that panel that will...
We have a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I couldn't follow what you were saying, so can I have time to read this?
Oh, sure, go right ahead.
Thank you. Ms. Walsh, I spoke to Assemblyman Trombley today because I wanted to have some questions answered also. And I asked him some specific questions per the ordinance. So I'm really puzzled why he would have then directed his questions to Mr. Wheeler.
This question came from me to Mr. Wheeler?
I understand that. No.
Mhm.
No, I asked a similar question.
Okay.
To Mr. Trombley to ask Mr. Wheeler. He called me back an hour later, recited the question I asked, and gave me Mr. Wheeler's answer, and it's different what you got. So,
Mr. Chairman, I might be able to clarify that a bit, because I think Mr. Trombley talked to his Assembly Counsel, Ms. Tucker, and she also sent an email basically at 5:16 PM after she'd talked to Mr. Tromley, reconfirming that what Mr. Wheeler indicated was correct. I can share that with you. I only brought one copy.
Well, that's no problem, Mr. Weaver. I just was trying to do my homework before I got here so that when questions came up, I could intelligently answer them, and I'm getting all sorts of different answers. So I guess it's how you ask the question.
Actually, Mr. Chair, we were not exactly sure ourselves in looking at the ordinance. That's the way we read it, that it had to go to the three-member board. We talked about it this morning with you and others, and so we went ahead and asked the question of legal. In strict reading of the code, the way it's structured, it has to go to the three-member body first.
Any other questions of the board? Keep continuing, Ms. Walsh, please.
All right, so of the three-member panels, at least two members of a panel, the ones we'll establish tonight, that are hearing an appeal shall be actively engaged in disciplined trades or professions relevant to the appeal. So we will have to keep that in mind as we structure these panels. So in other words, if you had a mechanical question, we presume we would have, for example, Mr. Frieden, Mr. Gray, and Mr. Merchant may be the mechanical panel. We'll, we'll sort that out here as we go. If we had an electrical question, electrical contractors present and, electrical engineer. So that's the intent. There is provision at the discretion, there is, if you go back to item 1, it says that the secretary of the board and the board chair may request members to take the place of a regularly assigned member when an assigned member is unavailable, or if there's a technical reason. Perhaps a question is, an appeal is based on an electrical conflict with a structural requirement or something like that. We may, we may need to change up the panel to adequately address the question, but that's provided for if that comes up. I believe tonight, and it'll be at the chairs, we'll sort that out here, but I think we'll probably do it along basic electrical, mechanical, structural, and perhaps a general panel. So you may want to be thinking about that because you'll be asked to serve, so something for the members to think about. Okay, going on, in the discretion of the building board, the decision of the three-member panel on an appeal from the decision of administrative official or other enforcement order may be accepted for de novo review by the building board, as provided further in the ordinance in 103.4. De novo, I had to look it up, I admit, means of new or second hearing. So that's a legal term, and that's what it means, is a rehearing of the same issue. I'm sure you all were aware of that, but I had to look it up. Any questions on that? Okay. The language about the item 4 is not changed materially. Building official is an ex officio member of the board, acts as secretary of the board, but shall not vote on any matter. The board shall, item previous 4, now 5, says the board shall follow rules of procedures approved by the assembly for conducting business. They did not give us any specific new rules of procedure, so until instructed otherwise, we'll follow the ones in your regulations. Yeah.
If I just stop and ask a question about item 3. Does that mean it's the board gets to ask, or the three-member panel or the board gets to ask for a de novo review, or is that an appellant gets to ask for it?
That is detailed later, further in the ordinance, but either party may ask for de novo review.
Okay, but
board-
it's in the discretion of the building board, so the building board, if an appellant asks for it, we get to determine whether we get a hearing.
That'll be discussed later in the ordinance, but yes, you get to decide if you will accept it for review.
Okay, and then we could accept it for review even if the appellant didn't ask for it.
You could, any party, including the board itself, can decide they want to accept it for review, that they want to review it or appeal it to the full board.
And the second question I have is item 4 talks about the building official should be an ex officio member of the board. On the three-member panel, what is the building official's representation there?
The building official would serve as staff. It would be similar to as now, I believe, but we can ask for clarification on that. That's a good
But
point.
is the intention that the building official is a ex officio member of a panel?
I believe so, but again, non-voting. I'll ask for clarification on that. That's a good point. Thank you. Through the chair, Mr. Looney.
A question at that point as well.
Okay, through the chair.
Go ahead.
Apologies. If the building official is an ex officio member of the board, are they not at the same time also offering their essentially one party coming at the, one party representing the question against another party, the one who is appealing the decision?
Would you like us?
Is that correct?
Okay.
Go ahead and answer, Ms. Walsh.
Okay, through the chair, Mr. Straight. In your rules of procedure in AMCR 2310, it describes the order of business for hearing an appeal, and generally the appellant produces their case. The staff, in this case, would present the case that they're appealing, or the decision, the staff's position, basically. And then the board would hear testimony from the appellant, testimony from the staff, and then would consider that in their decision.
Did that answer your question? Okay. I guess the question, go ahead.
How could staff be an ex officio member at that point?
Well, they can't, that's what I was going to ask.
Would you like to-
Mr. Chairman, I think we might,
The staff, Mr. Weaver, from what I understood, because I've asked this question also, and I might be getting just all the wrong answers, but staff is supposed to be a support of this board. This board operates independent of building safety or public works or building planning department, and staff is supposed to be support for this board. And I think the comments, I think the concern is if Ms. Walsh is there on or in the three-panel procedure.
staff is ex officio member basically to support the board functionally. It's not a participant. The staff's not a voting participant in your procedures. It's to support you in your process. So obviously, if you had an appeal of an issue from the building official, it would go both to the three-member panel and the full board, depending on which scenario it is, and it would be, staff would make a presentation, just like the rules of procedure call for, along with the applicant. Staff would be ex officio by putting the packet together that the board receives, but the staff is an active participant in that process.
And Mr. Chair, I may point out that this language has always been in the code in terms of the building official being ex officio members. So I'm not sure that it's been a problem for as long as the board's been established to date.
Ms. O'Donnell?
Just have a quick question. This section here says the building official shall be an ex officio member and shall act as a secretary to the board, but shall not vote upon any matter before the board. We're not talking about a panel. This is not directing any commentary towards the three-member hearing panel. Correct?
Mr. Chair, Ms. O'Donnell, I agree that the ordinance is lacking in some areas that maybe wasn't fully thought out at the time, because there are some inconsistencies between the full board and the three-member panels, but it's our opinion and assumption that they should function similarly.
I apologize, I think I'm just still confused. This is a section describing the appeal panel, its composition, how it functions, but number 4 doesn't discuss an appeal panel at all. It discusses the board.
Through the chair, Ms. O'Donnell, as I said at the beginning of this presentation, we have found inconsistencies in the ordinance. We anticipated that other items would come up as we discussed them, and then we will take those up with Mr. Wheeler as they're identified tonight. So this would be one of those ones I would take forward to Mr. Wheeler.
Thank you. Yeah, I do appreciate that. I'm still trying to understand the process. If it goes to the board and a panel at the same time?
No. But
Yeah.
I can just, again, speaking to the maker of the ordinance, trying to do my homework, I asked, and he again called, well, evidently he's saying he didn't call Wheeler, he must have called Julia Tucker, but I was told that an appellant could request a full board, not just a three-member panel, and I'll verify that tomorrow again, but it goes to the three-member panel, and then from what I understand, if either the building official and/or building safety or the appellant does not agree, which is almost going to happen 90% of the time, with the decision of the three-panel, then it goes to the large board.
Correct.
But they wouldn't be going to the three-panel team if they were in agreement in the first place, so I just don't know how they're going to come out with an agreement at the end. So, huh? Well, I mean, it's, is what it is.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Well, I would say that as we all have read regulations and code before, since number 4 is a subset of A, the building official would be part of that three-person panel. But I was assuming when I read this that meant that staff would be taking minutes of the three-panel person review, just as staff is taking minutes of the building board right now. And that's how I had interpreted that portion of it. So I think it would be appropriate that staff was taking minutes of these three-panel boards so that the building board can fully review the process that occurred during those reviews in order to help us to determine whether a de novo review would be appropriate or not. Thank you.
Mr. Brinkman, you did not get your answer before.
That clarifies.
That clarified it? Any other questions of the board? Proceed, Ms. Walsh, please.
Okay, thank you. Continuing, Mr. Chair, we were, I believe, were there questions on item 5? We will check on what the procedures were intended when they say approved by the Assembly, but I believe it's the most current regulation 2310 that you have in front of you. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to page 3, the modification standards. These, as you can see, since it's underlined language, this is all new information. It's the standards by which the board is to review modifications and alteration issues. Essentially, to grant a modification or strict application of the code, you must find that there's a special individual reason and that the code is impractical and the modification of granted will meet the following standards. This is similar almost exactly to the language that the building official has in terms of ability to grant modifications, and we discussed that at our last meeting, that the building official already has that power to grant modifications and approve alternative means and methods, and the board, staff's opinion, has always had that same power because they have the power to oversee the building official's decisions, but this ordinance specifically spells that out, that the board has that modification power. Then the standards are laid out. Again, these are essentially the same as what are the standards for the building official with one exception. Item 1 is verbatim. The modification must be in keeping with intent and purpose of the building code, same standard the building official has. Item 2, modification does not lessen health, life, and fire safety or structural requirements in the code. Added for the people of Anchorage, who's been added to the board's power, so that's interesting. Item 3, strict application of the code would create an exceptional or undue hardship. New language is, item 3 is essentially new. Strict application of the code would create an exceptional or undue hardship, including but not limited to financial hardship, and the modification will protect health, safety, and welfare to the same or higher degree than the specific requirement and regulation. So this is quite new, and prior to this time, there's been, financial hardship has not been a standard for considering a modification. The board will have quite a responsibility in administering this clause, that it's, that health, safety, and welfare is indeed being applied in the same or higher degree than the requirement and regulation. Items 4 and 5 actually are taken from the commentary on the building code, and it mentions that a modification shall not extend a waiver of actions that are necessary to correct a violation of code affecting life, health, fire, safety, or structure requirements. So if a person was written up for a code violation and then came to the board to seek relief because they had done a violation, this would give the board the power to say, no, you violated the code, and we can't grant you a modification just to correct that you violated. So these are things the board will have to keep in mind as these appeals come up to them. And then item 5 is also from the commentary with the first sentence discusses that a modification has to be determined to be equally safe, and it's sort of it's a variation of words from the commentary, but it again is to impress upon the board that they must exercise due care, that whatever modification they may grant must be equally safe and meet the same requirements as the intent of the code. Questions?
Yes, Mr. Looney?
Yeah, I have two questions. One, have we received any kind of information, or has anybody discussed this modification of standards section with the state fire marshal? My understanding is that generally municipality of Anchorage can't do less than the state adopted code, and this would potentially allow this board to accept an alternate means and methods that may not comply with the adopted state code.
Through the chair, Mr. Looney, we did speak specifically to the state fire marshal and also to the Department of Labor, to Mr. Nagel, who administers the mechanical electrical provisions of the state code. The state fire marshal read the language and felt that in general that the burden of proof would be that it would have to be determined to be equally safe. You'll see further down in terms of limitation of authority that previously the ordinance actually gave the board the authority to waive code versus granting a modification, and that is a specific difference. You'll see that language was struck out in the final approved version. Because of that strikeout, the fire marshal felt that he could accept this ordinance as is. But the burden is still going to be on the board to assure that they have not, they're not allowing a modification that's less safe. So that's a high standard the board needs to keep in mind. In regards to Department of Labor, their concerns with the ordinance are, as you know, their deferment is based on the same idea that the municipality is allowed to administer the plumbing and electrical and codes themselves as long as we're at least as stringent as the state code. And we can be more stringent than the state code, but not less than. And they've cautioned that any appeal that comes to the board along those lines needs to be checked against state requirements. And if it, and they specifically stated that it must not, the board will not, if the board, our interpretation is if the board does grant a modification that's less stringent than state standards, then the state will have cause for concern and consider pulling the deferment. I do have a letter from Mr. Nagel to that effect that I can make available to you.
Okay, so the next question I have is, essentially you've inferred, and I kind of agree, we're sticking our neck out by making, if we made a deviation from the letter of the code, is there an indemnification or insurance on board members? What is our extent of our liability if we do that, and is the municipality of Anchorage protecting us from that liability?
Would you like to speak to that? Although go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, we did speak to that last session with the board, but I believe you were not here. Typically, if the board's acting in its official capacity and good faith effort, you are indemnified from those types of situations.
I think Mr. Weaver, that I was discussing with Mr. Looney, I think his concern is more about your E&O insurance
Yeah.
as a professional engineer versus the
Yeah.
release from the municipality, I guess.
Well, I think it kind of goes to both, and frankly, I probably ought to be talking to my E&O insurer and find out what their thoughts are on it. It probably would not cover the actions, that I'm taking as a representative on this board. But I do agree, I think we're on perilous ground if we make any kind of significant deviations or even minor deviations from the adopted code.
Our intent is to have state comments in any cases that come before you, is to have state comments in the record.
May I add something, Mr. Chair?
Turn on your-
Yes, Mr. Ross?
Yeah.
Or Ross?
I
Mr.
think
Ross.
basically, number one, the modification is in keeping with the intent and purpose of the code. As long as the board stays focused on number one, they'll be fine. Number one and the new stuff they added, like 3, 4, and 5, can easily conflict with each other. So, I think if you stay focused on that part, you'd probably be okay.
On 1 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
Ms. Walsh, I guess I'll ask the question of this entire board, and I've asked it for probably the last 12 years, 14, I'll have to find out when I first was appointed. If, per Mr. Looney's comment, that we have to stay strict intent or strict guidelines of the code, obviously your staff is intelligent enough to tell us what their interpretation of the guidelines are. And if we can't modify from that, why are we here? This board doesn't need to be here if it's right there in black and white. The codes, being involved with ICC as much as I am, codes are subjective, and they're interpreted different ways. And sometimes, for geographical, climatic, or whatever, you can't meet the strict intent of the code.
Mr. Chairman, maybe I could try to do that, respond to that a little bit. You are an oversight board in some respects, with some small part of your responsibilities to the decisions of the building official. That's why the appeals are built into the system. They gave you authority to look at that. But you have to use the same due diligence in looking at the issue that staff look at every day in making those decisions. Do they meet the intent and the letter of the code? Sometimes there are those gray areas that require some considered decisions and opinions to be made. Not one individual is infallible in making those decisions. That's partly why you're here, is that oversight. But when you do make those decisions, you need to put that on the record and make your findings as to why you're making those decisions for whatever reasons, that so they can withstand the test of time, because they need that findings of fact for every decision that you make.
If I can just add something.
Go ahead, Mr. Looney.
I've many times I've been down to the municipality of Anchorage arguing gray areas that sometimes, are beneficial to clients that I'm working with. So there are gray areas in all of the codes. There are areas that, a designer who understands what he's doing, or a contractor understands what he's doing, can have some latitude. And so I think it's beneficial to have somebody have the ability to look at the specific circumstances and make an evaluation. I will tell you also that on this board, if we're given this opportunity, I'll be very cautious in anything that I would do that would not meet the direct intent of the code, and I think all of us will also. I am concerned with the relationship with the state, and the fact that we need to have We need to enforce codes at least as stringent as they will, otherwise it imperils the municipality of Anchorage's ability to interpret codes at all and enforce codes. So I think that's the other side of things, too.
Just to be a wise guy, if you're going to enforce them as much as the state, you're not going to enforce them at all, because
Yeah, well, that
they
is
don't have
true,
any
too.
enforcement, so that would be wonderful for the industry if,
Mr.
Believe me,
Chairman.
they in some areas, they enforce them very well.
yes, I understand that. I was just making a wisecrack. Mr. Steele?
Not to digress, but one of the comments I would throw out, just for everyone to keep in mind and staff, is on the years I've been on the board, there's been a wide variety of information that has been submitted in hard copy and presented the night of the meeting. And I'm not saying this will happen, but with a reduced cost and a potential of seeing more and more appeals, I do think that the appellant does need to come with the board with this same understanding of what their purpose is in terms of getting us to make consideration. And I would certainly hope that we're not, the night of the meeting, given reams and stacks of paper or trying to explain the issue. And I just hope it would be a process and that they would respect, or maybe we need to step up and say, by a certain date, this type of information needs to be provided or the hearing won't occur. And I would suggest we should probably, with staff, kind of have that kind of discussion so that we're not just winging it that night on some very important issues.
Well taken, Mr. Steele.
Through the chair, if I may. Again, if you have, when you have the time to refer to your regulations, you'll see 2310-006 regarding a case file being established. The secretary of the board's responsibility to do that. Following items would be the application, a copy of the plans or other illustrative materials submitted by the applicant, copy of staff memorandum and recommendation, copy of all comments received from other agencies, any materials submitted at the hearing which the board designates to be included in the case file, so that's laid on the table type items you're referring to, and return notices from property owners and abatement appeal cases, that's a separate item, and copies of minutes of the board for the applicable case. Then when you go to order of business, which is 2310-016, on appeals on actions of administrative official, the order of business is all testimony is to be given under oath administered by the presiding officer, and the oath you've heard Mr. Michelson administer before. The staff outlines the case. The presiding officer requires the appellant and the witnesses to give their presentation first. After conclusion of the appellant's presentation, staff and any witnesses shall make their presentation. Both staff and appellant and administrative staff may ask questions of the opposite party. Appellant shall have the right of rebuttal. Any party may be represented by legal counsel before the board if they wish. Formal,
Ms. Walsh,
I'm just about done.
I know, I'm sorry to stop you, but I think most of the board understands you're going back in how the case is presented.
Right.
What Mr. Steele, I think, is saying, if I heard him correctly, I think it sort of echoes what I asked in the beginning. We got all this paperwork, and we're being asked to read it right now, and we're being asked to understand it right now. And I think what Mr. Steele is asking, as if I was in this position in the future, I would ask, is that when we have an appeal, that we need to be better equipped as a board instead of coming there the night of it. And then if Mr. Lee was the appellant, he knows what he's seeking. You know what he's seeking because you've been dealing with him, but we have no idea.
I understand completely, and if we can ask your indulgence, that is spoken to further on in the ordinance about requirements for submitting information to the board, and should the board want more information, requirements for actually delaying a hearing until that information is
Is that what you were asking, Mr. Steele, basically?
presented.
Well, and it wasn't as a pointed barb to staff or appellant. It was just that in the past, I've sat here on evenings where there's been nothing more than the handwritten application, and that's all that was really of substance until the presentation started. And you feel very pressed to say, no, not tonight, sorry. I mean, this was a monthly basis, a scheduled meeting, and maybe we need to toughen up, but I'm just wondering if through some kind of work sessions or the like, if we could maybe become a little more definitive in that submittal process in terms of either a handout or something that is, lining out really that there's a burden to bring and present. Otherwise, it really becomes a challenge, I think. Not that we can't do it and haven't done it, but I think it improves the process.
Through the chair, that's a point well taken, and we'll discuss it as we continue through the ordinance, but I understand exactly what you're saying. And again, we do apologize for not having the packet to you until tonight, but the situation was until the Assembly took their reconsideration action up on this just 2 days ago, we weren't sure what was going to be in that packet, so we have to ask your indulgence on that.
One thing else, if I may, just for the board, because I've been trying to do homework and trying to come to you folks this evening with a little more knowledge of what took place Tuesday night. But the way boy, and maybe it's not in writing, and as I read it, I see that there's some overlap, but the way I think it was intended was that the three-member panel from this board would be more of almost a mediator, if you want to call it that. So, Mr. Steele, I don't think in the three-member panel that, and this is the way I was, again, told again tonight, so I'm going to clarify all this, but it was more, it's a, get the three heads together, get the opinions of the professionals together, and see if you can iron it out and make a decision before it went to the full board. But if the building department's not going to take it like that and they're going to treat it, I don't know how
Mr.
it's
Chairman,
going
it's
to work.
not the building department. The legal department said that's the way it's written, so that's the ordinance we have to follow.
I think it would behoove this board if they sat down with and how does the board feel, with the municipal attorney? And also, actually, quite frankly, I'd like to sit down with Mr. Trombley and have a roundtable discussion. So since this board's going to be affected so much, that we hear it from the municipal attorney and let everybody on this board direct their questions to the attorney if he's available.
It's challenging, Mr. Chairman, but we already have the first application for one of these hearings. It's not a complete application yet. It was turned in today. I would imagine it'll probably be finished tomorrow, but we're on very tight time constraints, 5 days to schedule a hearing, get out the notices, the 7-day notice, so that's about 12, 13, 14 days. But it's already in play. We've had two attorneys, Ms. Tucker, the Assembly Counsel, and Dennis Wheeler, the municipal attorney, reviewed it today. That is the way the ordinance was written. There's no question about it. So I'm not sure what additional information you'd be looking for from Mr. Wheeler. There may have been different intentions on how this was to be put together, but this is the way it came out.
Any other questions at this time on this one subject? Seeing none, please proceed, Ms. Walsh.
I believe Ms.
I'm
O'Donnell
sorry.
had a question.
Sorry, Ms. O'Donnell.
I think I understand what was being asked, is that the appeal should be provided with enough documentation, that the appeal application should be provided with enough information that it can be digested by the panel prior to the 5-day waiting period, or the 5-day ticking clock that's been set before that meeting takes place. I'm sorry, I've never seen an application for an appeal before, and I'm not sure what is required by the applicant to provide.
If I could, through the chair, as I was just finishing up on the rules of procedure, item K of the rules of procedure states that the burden of proof rests with the appellant, who must convince the board by preponderance of the evidence that the appeal should be granted. And that would be the materials that they submitted to make their case. The findings of the board, as Mr. Weaver was saying, shall be specific findings of facts and conclusions of law. The affirmative vote of a majority of the fully constituted board is necessary to grant an appeal in whole or in part. That's the rest of those procedures. So again, I do encourage you to refer back to your procedures, and if you need more copies, we'll be happy to get them to you.
I'm sorry, was that
Go ahead.
distributed at the last meeting?
Yes, that should have been the packet that was emailed to you as well. But we can certainly get you another copy. And you can also find them online on MuniCode.
Any other questions at this time? Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I have to apologize for not looking up the minutes from the assembly meeting, but would you be so kind as to inform us what happened with the reconsideration of the ordinance?
Yes, just real quick, it came up for reconsideration by Assemblyman Drummond and Gray, and it was asked, the chair, Osianda, asked for the question, and Drummond and Gray basically said that they were attending the prior assembly meeting via telephone, and they could not hear as well as they wanted to, and such. So the vote came forward, and it was 3 in favor of reconsideration, and what was it, 8 opposed? 8 opposed, and the 3 in favor was Drummond, Gray, and Honeman. Those are the 3 in favor, and so it failed. So at that point in time, as soon as it failed, the chair announced that it did fail, it won't be reconsidered. So the vote that was taken 2 weeks prior to that, on passing this, which was the vote at the assembly at that time was 11 to nothing, unanimous. In favor of it, including Drummond, Gray, and Honeman had voted in favor of it. So it just basically, the reconsideration request failed. Is that correct, Steph? Does that pretty much sum it up?
Mr. Frieden has a comment.
Yeah.
But yes,
Mr. Chair, I just also want to note that the Assembly added a sunset date to this as well on December 31st.
From what I understand, the sunset date is December 31st, 2012.
Then unless in the Assembly takes...
I see Mr. Weaver getting to the mic, is that correct?
That is correct, but the board sunsets in October, so we have to sort this all out before October.
That's what I thought. That's why I thought sunset was October, but.
if I may, through the chair, the board, when the Boards and Commissions Title IV was readopted this year, almost all of the boards received a sunset date. Very few of them did not. And this board does sunset October 14th of 2012, unless brought forward to not sunset. And I think the intent of those provisions, I was at that assembly meeting, was that internal audit would be doing an audit to make sure that each board was necessary. And if there was a board that was not doing much business or not required, then they would, the recommendation would be that it go away. Now, I don't believe that'll happen with this, but the issue needs to be dealt with.
And you're correct, and not to interrupt you, and that's what happened last November, December, and I got a call from Mr. Baker of the mayor's office, and Mr. Baker assured me, well, his recommendation to the mayor was going to be that this board does not sunset, basically ever, and I don't know if he's got that pull with the mayor, but.
Mr. Chair, and that's information, but we'll have to go through
I
the
know,
process.
we'll have to wait.
Other ones are going through that now, and then let's presume that the board is reinstituted before the October 12th date. Then this ordinance will stay in effect. But this ordinance itself sunsets at the end of this year, and if not sunsetted, I don't quite know how they do that, but then we'd revert to the previous code prior to this ordinance being enacted. That's my understanding. Correct?
Mr. Ferdine, did that answer your question?
Yes, I just wanted to, that was the portion of it, that unless the Assembly took an action on this again at a future date, then it would cease to exist at December 31st. Now, the question, I guess, for staff would be is, would voting on the sunset, basically reissuing Title 20, this section of it, that's basically how the sunset process works, at least at the state level, is they revoke this section and they readopt it or something like that. And would that be a vote on this and that, therefore, taking an action on it?
Mr. Chair, Ms. Verdeen, we had basically, in August, sometime probably August, put an ordinance forward in conjunction with the administration mayor's office. I'm pretty sure that that they're not going to sunset this board, but we would put an ordinance together to keep the board and make any adjustments to the ordinance that was passed as necessary.
Any other questions?
Can I?
Yeah, Mr. Looney?
I guess I didn't see the procedure document, but in the process that an appellant would go through, would he first be required to go through an alternate means process, and then if that was denied, then he goes through this process, or would they skirt around that and go directly to this process?
Through the chair, Mr. Looney, our understanding is that the board is established to hear appeals, and so they would have to come through the alternate methods. It would have to be a matter that they could not resolve with the building official before it would come to the board, to the appeal panel and then to the board.
Okay, and so that would be the minimum level of documentation we'd get in advance of hearing an appeal would be the alternate means justification and documentation, so we'd at least get that prior to hearing an appeal.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay. Shall we?
Proceed.
Okay. So we're now on the changes to 2310-10342, limitations of authority. And the added language is the previous language is already your charter prior to this action. Added language is modifications must meet the standards within the building board's jurisdiction. So that refers you back up to the modification standards. The next section describes the composition of the board, and in here we found a conflict that we need to take up with legal. As previously stated, it changes the composition from no fewer than 11 and up to 15 members. However, when you go to the next page, it discusses the specific makeup of the board, and there seems to be a math issue because, as you'll see, it'll be 2 architects, two professional civil engineers, 1 mechanical engineer, one professional mechanical engineer, 1 professional electrical engineer. Then it says 4 members shall be licensed general contractors, and at least 2 of the 4 actively engage in home building. Keeps the other language of 1 member electrical contractor, 1 member licensed plumbing contractor, 1 member licensed mechanical contractor, and then 2 additional members qualified in out of any of the other trades listed above. The problem is, instead of saying up to 4 for item 5, it says 4. So if you do the math, it now makes the minimum board 13, not 11. So we need to take that conflict up with
10,
legal.
11, 12, 13. I get 15.
You get 15 total, but if you go to the low end of it, it says up to 2. Item 9 says up to 2 additional members, so that's up to them. It could be, they could not be there, so that would take you to 13.
Well, yes, Ms. Walsh, but it also says you can have from 11 to 15. So they're saying you could have 13, you can have 15, you
Well,
can have 12.
It mandates that you have 4 general contractors in addition to all these other people, so you add that up and you have 13.
So the
Minimum.
minimum board size has to be 13 to comply with this section.
Unless you happen to have a member who's a professional engineer and a contractor at the same time.
Can happen.
Suppose you could do it that way. So we'll need to clarify that discrepancy with legal. Okay. Questions on that? Okay, quorum. The quorum of the board shall be 50% plus 1 of the appointed members. And that was changed, instead of saying a majority of the fully constituted board, because the board now can fluctuate in members. So that's why the 50% plus 1 was required. In voting, this is a full body. That would be a majority vote. Now, keep in mind the full body. We'll talk about that later on, because there are the body count, pardon the expression, changes depending on a 3-member panel situation. So we'll get to that in a minute if you can indulge us on that. Moving on to the 3-member hearing panels, item C on page 5 of 7. This This gets into the meat of the three-member panel. It says that a building board three-member hearing panel shall hear and decide appeals from decisions of administrative officials and other enforcement orders relating to code regulations under Title 23. Person with the right to appeal has 30 days from the date of the action. And this should all be underlined, as I understand. This is all new language. A person with the right to appeal has 30 days from the date of the action of an administrative official to file an appeal with the secretary of the building board, unless a longer time period is stated in writing by the building official. If no appeal is filed within the time period, the action of the administrative official is deemed final and binding and not subject to any further appeal. And, up to this point, we have not had appeals in the last 5 years, and we recognize, tighten up our own procedures and be sure that when we get a request, sometimes, especially in the world of emails go back and forth, but a definitive, this is our final decision and you have 30 days to appeal it letter, we will have to be sure and make that definite so that a person who's denied an action will understand that their clock is running, and will take that on as a responsibility to do that notice. So that's the situation that would bring an appeal to a three-member panel. Are there questions about that? Nope. Continue?
Yeah, can I just ask a question on that? So what they're saying is, so if an individual comes to you and your staff and cannot resolve the situation, and you give them a final answer, is that what I'm hearing? So you're giving, the building official gives them an answer, then they have 30 days from the time they receive that answer?
The date of the action. So at the time that if a person were to, not have a disagreement with the plan review, it would be elevated to engineering services manager. If
It comes to you.
If it ends up with me as a building official, and I take an action, and I have been, most actions I've taken, I've been quite good about documenting, either requiring a letter from the person and handwriting on my decision on it, or we've used the alternate means and method forms itself, whatever that might be. We'll need to be careful to have those things in writing and date definite, so that the person, if the person wishes to appeal, that it's clear when that action was taken. So that's something we'll have to be careful on our part. Okay.
Thank you. Proceed, please.
Okay, quorum for hearing panel members, for 3, you have to have all 3. So all 3 people must be present to make a quorum. And on voting, the decision granting or let's presume denial of an appeal, either way, shall require the concurring vote of 2 members of the panel. So 2 of the 3 members must concur on the decision. Then we get to the discretionary de novo rehearing. And in its sole discretion, as determined by a majority vote of 50% plus 1 of the members, not disqualified from voting, and I'll explain that in a moment, the board may accept an appeal decided by a 3-member hearing panel, in whole or in part, for de novo rehearing by the full board. Application for a rehearing may be made by any party or by any member of the building board. So either the appellant, we were interpreting that the appellant, the department, or a member of the full board, any member of the board itself, and perhaps that's where the ex officio part of it comes in. We'll clarify that. Upon hearing the decision of the 3-member panel, may file an appeal. But that application for a de novo hearing by the full board must be filed within 5 business days, so consider it 7 calendar days, from publication of the hearing panel's decision. And we will get into the timing of all this here at the end. I've made sort of a chart for us to work from, and for us to try to make sure we're all clear on how these timings work, because it's tricky. Another question is, a question that I have on item E2 is, what constitutes publication of the hearing panel's decision? Does that mean at the time that, that's not clearly defined. We as the secretary of the board are required to write the minutes and so on. How many days do we have to, write the minutes of the meeting and publish the decision? That's not clear in this document, and we need to talk about that. Item 3, on the question of whether or not the board should rehear a matter, as a full board, the members of that particular panel may not vote. So if, let's say we have the current composition of the board, 11 people, there's a 3-member panel meeting on a structural issue. The panel decides in a certain way, the appellant wants to bring it to the full board, or the department wants to bring it to the full board. The 8 members not on that panel are the constitute who, they decide whether or not they're going to rehear it. So that's, we interpret that to mean that.
Ms. O'Donnell?
I have a quick question. What constitutes a quorum in that instance?
And that, I believe, is if you go to the beginning of E, where they say, majority vote of 50% plus one of the members not disqualified from voting.
Not disqualified.
So that would mean if you had 8 people looking at it, then 5 would have to say, yes, we'll take this up as a full board. At least 5 would have to agree to take it up as a full board.
Okay.
Okay? So then, moving on from that, it's important to note that if a rehearing is accepted by,
Ms. Walsh, to go back to Ms. O'Donnell's question, under Building Board Quorum and Voting B, under B2, and then underneath that, is that new? It says 6 members of the Building Board shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of any business for
as I said,
So that's not necessarily 50 plus 1. then.
no, Mr. Michelson, because that's in brackets, that signifies that was deleted from the
Okay,
ordinance.
thank you. I'm sorry for
Okay.
that.
Okay, continuing, item 4 on page 6 of 7. If de novo rehearing is accepted, then the members of the hearing panel can participate as a full board. So once the 8 people not on the panels, 5 of them say, yes, we're going to take it as a full board, then the entire 11-member board would look at it. Okay, any questions on that?
No, then they can vote, I think, yes.
They can participate again in the de novo hearing, but they can't participate in the decision whether or not to go to de novo hearing.
So they cannot vote in the decision to rehear, but if it is decided that it is to be reheard, then they can participate or
But
participate
they can
and
vote,
vote?
they're
Everybody's new again.
completely reinstated, yeah. Okay. Any further questions on that? Oh, okay, continuing on, this is where we start to get kind of tricky, and that's, in a moment, I'll get out the chart here, but we're almost to the end, so bear with me here. These are the responsibilities of the secretary to the building board, which is officially myself as building official and whom I should designate to assist. The building official or designee shall be an ex officio member without vote, shall act as secretary of the board, shall prepare all correspondence, send out all required notices within 5 business days, keep minutes of meetings, and maintain a file in each case coming before the board. But this language is sort of difficult for us because required notices of what? We presume this is to mean appeals, but it could be a notice. Is it a notice that, hey, we're going to have a meeting? Is it a notice that we're readopting Title 23? We're presuming that could be a notice for anything. So we have 5 business days, so then the question begins, I presume, and we're interpreting it as that once either an appeal is filed, we have 5 business days to notify the board that an appeal's been to do intake, to notify the board that an appeal has been filed, to research it, to begin putting the case together. And the minutes of meetings, maintaining a file is more straightforward. Within the 5 business days, again, of what? What's that trigger? And again, and in the case of appeal, that's fairly straightforward. It's when it's filed. In the case of some other item, we presume it's when a dangerous building gets posted. That's tricky. This is the tricky part. We need to get some clarification from legal on this. Then, going on, the secretary of the building board will provide timely electronic notice and copies of hearing panel's decisions to the full building board. Timely, and that should be fairly easy to do. I mean, I can imagine that can be something we can send an email the next day saying this was the decision of the board. So that shouldn't be too difficult, or the next business day, presuming there's a strange holiday like 4th of July or something. So perhaps that's not as that difficult to meet, although it would have been helpful if timely was better defined. Okay, now this is where we really get tricky, and supplementing the hearing packet. The building board panel requires data and documents not in the current possession of the building official. Secretary shall act timely on the request, timely again, to ensure the hearing packet is supplemented with requested information prior to hearing. So I take this to mean if we we get an appeal, we file the notice, we schedule a meeting, we notice the board there's going to be an appeal, we find a meeting date, we public notice that meeting, we prepare the packet for you and get it to you prior to the meeting. Presumably, you'll review that packet prior to the meeting, and some members of the board may say, I need more information. They ask us back for information. Then we have it says we shall request the supplemental information within 5 days of receipt of the notice of appeal. So to me, that means we have 5 days to take it in, get all the research done, get opinions from the state, get it to you, you look at it, and then you need to tell us if you need more information. So it's going to be tricky for us to meet these times, and they sort of overlap with each other. And then we presume once the board asks for more information, it's that failure to request or receive information timely. Now that would be from the appellant if they need to get us more information, maybe a reason to reschedule the hearing. So we could be getting into some do-loops with some of this, and we need to keep that in mind. The next, and just if I could ask you to hold your questions on that till I kind of pass out this outline, because we've been struggling to try to put this in something that we could work with. Then the last part of the ordinance is the appeal filing fee has been reduced to $100 and shall accompany the filing of the appeal. That's the appeal we got today. They didn't bring the fee, so they need to do that before it's official. And it's important to note that if it goes to full board, there's no additional fee. So there's quite a bit of time and cost involved with these appeals. It's our intent to process them as efficiently as possible because they will be taking away from our resources to do our other work. Okay, the last item, section 3, is another error in the ordinance that we need to just note to legal, but we're not, it's question's rather moot. The idea was, as I said at the beginning of the evening, is for purposes of establishing hearing panels under section 2, first meeting of 2012 shall be within 16 days, and I believe they meant of the effective date of the ordinance, which would make the meeting tonight, because we told them we had a meeting with you tonight. And then they said of the appointment of the 11th member of the building board, which I believe was Mr. Straight. So I don't know when you were appointed, but I think we're past that time. So that's clearly an error, and I think the question's moot. So at this time, while we're waiting for the chair to return, Ms. Klender has, we attempted to make an outline to kind of, now that we've been through each of these items, we're because we appear to have quite a responsibility to essentially put all available resources into meeting these timelines, we wanted to get kind of an idea for ourselves of what they really were. And we will be talking to legal again because, as you can see, some of them, some of this timing is just, as I said, tricky. It's the best way I can describe it. So now that when you get your charts, you'll see that I've referred to the specific items in the ordinance where an action is discussed, what time, when it says a specific time, I put that under the when, and then the remarks are just kind of observations. Some of them I've just now made to you, but I think it'll all come together now as we walk through this summary. And we welcome questions or clarifications if you are able to provide it. So this document, this chart that you have here is strictly dealing with the appeal procedure. Just trying to make sense of it, just trying to get the timeline figured out. So you can see the sections. The first line, A1 and 2, establish up to the 5 panels. It appears the when of that is the first meeting of the year, starting with tonight's meeting. That's our interpretation of that. And
I just have a question on the timeline. You know, as I saw in there that the if one of the panels hears an appeal, if somebody wants to bump it up to the full building board, it needs to first be submitted to the building board so they can determine if
Correct.
they want to hear the
Correct.
appeal. So that's going to require, because it has to happen within, I don't know what the time frame is there, but so you have to call an emergency board meeting or a non-scheduled board meeting perhaps in order to do that, just so they agree that they will hear the appeal, in which case then you have to schedule the appeal for a later date.
Well, actually, I did have that same question myself. And we'll go through that in some of the public notice requirements about public meetings. But I did have that same question of, if the 8 people decide that the board should take this up, can they do that at the same meeting, similar to a reconsideration, where you vote to reconsider it and then you reconsider it? And my gut feeling was that you could, and the first email that Ms. Klender handed out to you was answered that question from Mr. Wheeler. And that is correct. He feels that you could hear it the same night as deciding to hear it. But that, sorry, now I've got my papers messed up here. Well, there's 2 ways it could go. I'm sorry, Jared, do you have that copy of that other email? Yeah. It's the email dated March 29, 2:13 p.m. No, that's not it. It's the other one. There we go. 2:37 p.m. I've asked, can the board take up a de novo issue on the same night that it votes on whether or not to accept it for de novo? Or does that have to happen at a subsequent meeting, or so an additional notice can be made, additional public notice? So my sense is it could work similar to reconsideration, where both actions could happen on the same night. He wrote back that it can happen at the same meeting, but only if the application is publicly noticed in advance on the agenda and the parties to the appeal are notified in writing that the item is an agenda item and will be heard de novo at that meeting. The board would have to adopt a policy to that effect, so staff would do the noticing as a matter of routine. So the problem is it's not really practical that everyone bring their lawyer, get all set up to appear to the full board at the same meeting when you may vote not to take it up. It's similar to the reconsideration that happened last Tuesday evening. We were all there in case questions were answered. We waited until the time came, and then it wasn't reconsidered. So, we departed. So that is something that the board needs to sort out. There's a lot of efficiency in hearing it when you first vote to, but again, if you vote not to, then the people who've all shown up to plead their case may feel like, well, what was that? So the board may want to decide on that, how they want to go with it. And we'll, of course, work with legal.
Ms. Walsh, can you hold on for a minute? I had to step away from does anybody else want to take a 5-minute break real quick? Are you guys all holding strong?
Soldier on?
Before we get too in-depth
Sure.
in this, we're going to take a quick 5-minute.
Sounds good.
I'm like this. Short
Grail.
You see, we don't,
Commercial doesn't. Well, this was a commercial job.
very, very few, and when we do, almost always.
Residential has less problem, only because residential, you do commercial, residential is such a tight timeline. Once we make a bid to our customers, we can't, commercial, they can add, they can add. We can't, customer says, tough shit. Figure it out. That's why we're in there fighting tooth and nail. Yeah, but commercial, I've seen so many times, I've bid commercial, and I see stuff on the bid, and I say, but it really needs this, and everybody says, no, don't bid that. I says, 'cause that's an add-on.
You kind of course?
I'm saying, what do you mean? I know it needs it. No, that's gonna be an extra. You can't do that in residential. I mean, you gotta figure the worst.
Oh, yeah.
But in commercial, they don't, they just charge extra, charge extra.
Well, you can, commercial, you can't, especially at this time, because the competitors charge.
Right. Right.
You can't have
I've bid against government, some government, UA stuff. I've gone into the procurement office and said, but you need this, you need that. And March 31st, I got like 3 deadlines. I told you needed, they didn't. And then they let out to everybody, now, I just finally learned to shut up.
These are a lot of core workers, he's saying the union strict. First time you hit that, unilateral decision on change order.
You can see we're actually battling. Which is okay. I think this can, you know what I thought?
That was bought by
Good or bad, they had it all.
Oh, great asset.
5 days. But I was told today by the maker, Trump, that I told him, okay, I have something I can't get resolved by Tuesday. I want to be heard tomorrow and Tuesday at 7 days. He said, yep.
It won't be that hard to
Suppose we wheel it, but I guess not. Called Nutso.
temporarily while they did that, they didn't want to free up.
She told him, yes. You can do it within 7 days. But you're right.
Everybody out of here. DCT boring. Friday. No, you gotta leave right now.
You're right. I mean, that's why I don't think the 3-member panel has to be made up. I think the chairman just calls and says, hey, would you do it? Would you do it? Would you do it? Yeah, okay, you guys go. You don't have a pre-designated
It's gonna be so
panel.
hard to make a form.
Right. Correct. As long as they're in, I mean, if it's an electrical issue, it has to be him, and like you, or him and me. But you don't have to be. I see this so much.
I can't tell family. I can tell you.
But you can and make a determination by what. I can. No, I don't think that at all. I mean, I just got a point.
He told us.
Plumbing. Let's wrap it up back there, guys. Well, the first one left like immediately. As soon as you started talking, he was out of here. I think Cody heard enough. He could be back. We're missing one, but, missing, yeah, Tana too. Paige and Tana. And Mr. Fradine. Mr. Fradine and Tana, are you in the building still? Sandwiches? No, just missing Fradine. Is Fradine back there still?
Right there.
Oh. Okay, I'm sure he can hear you. Ms. Walsh, continue, please. I'm sorry for the interruption, but I think it was prudent that we all took a little break.
No, I think that was a timely break, Mr. Chair. Okay, so again, this handout that you have before you is an attempt to kind of distill the appeals process and the timeline associated with it. And again, any clarification that the board might be able to offer is welcome. We'll have to, I've already told Mr. Wheeler that I'm going to have to get with him to clarify some of the issues that we've talked about tonight. And in answer to your previous suggestion, maybe we need to have a full work session with the board with Mr. Wheeler as well.
Phone call was made again today, so I mean, everybody knows I made some phone calls again, and it was really trying to help the board. But I asked, again, I gave a scenario where if I had an appeal, I talked to you on Monday, I've been talking to you for weeks, and I talked to you on Monday, and you give me your answer, and I don't like your answer, so then I say I'm going to go to the building board. So I tell you that Tuesday morning, I hand you my application. I was told today that the case with the three-member panel could be heard the following Tuesday.
That's what we'll walk through right now. And you were told that by whom?
Again, I was told that by Trombley, who asked, I thought Wheeler, but evidently he must have asked Julia Tucker. So I'm going to have to ask that question again, because I explained to Mr. Trombley that if it's a month waiting period, that's not going to benefit the industry, anybody's interest. And he thought it was immediate, and I said, no, I don't think it's immediate. I think you have to publicize. And he did, and then he came back to me and said, yes, it has to be notified, publicized, but that the three-panel meeting was not a public meeting. In other words, it's just notifying the public that a meeting was being held. Public could attend, but there was no public testimony required to be taken. It was just the three members and the appellant and yourself and staff. But it could be heard in exactly 1 week, the 7-day period. That question kind of went around up here a little bit also. And then I think you mentioned in your brief a little while ago that there's a 5-day period. I don't think the 5 days is mandatory. I think it's up to 5 days after you make your notice that you're whatever denying or not granting the request. So that could be done in 1 day, I guess. But so I don't know. Help me out here.
Yeah, if, Mr. Chair, if I could ask you to kind kind of work with me as we walk through this chart, and then maybe we come back to it, and then we discuss?
Yeah, I'm trying to help you right now, I'm trying
Right.
to help the whole board understand.
Right,
but-
and I can speak to some of that as we go. It would be more in context if we did it that way. Okay? Mr. Looney had a
I'll
question?
hold then
Okay.
to wait for your explanation.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll start again on the first line. The action is that we need to establish up to 5 panels, and it appears that needs to be done tonight.
Okay, can I address each one as you come up just a
Yeah.
little bit? Questions were asked here. The 5 panels, because you and I had spoke about this, Ms. Walsh. There may be a time when you have a particular panel, let's just use the first 3 individuals, Mr. Steele, Mr. Gray, and botching it down there, but Mr. Straight. So if you called them and Mr. Steele said yes and Mr. Gray said yes, but Mr. Straight said no, yes, you can pull an alternate. Couldn't this board, maybe to Mr. Weaver this question is, but couldn't this board just agree that at the time of an appeal, the chairman at the time can just call up maybe all the members and say, okay, do you want to go, do you want to go, do you want to go? And just make that board, make that 3-panel that night?
That is, what do you mean, that night?
Well, in other words, he calls you back and say, okay, I have 3 people ready to do
I
this
don't
appeal.
see, if you refer, in terms of substituting members of the panels, that's covered back on page 2 of 7,
Right.
where it says that we shall, you and I, or whoever the chair is, shall assign members to a panel and may request members to take place of regular panel members when one's unavailable or to provide technical familiarity. So, yes, it's clear that the authority is there to swap people in and out of panels. In terms of the timeline, we'll get to that as we proceed, if you'll indulge me. Okay, the next, walking through the ordinance, Part 41A3, the full board, just mentions the full board may review the 3-member decisions de novo case. 43A5, 4 members of the board must be general contractors, 2 in home building, and I made the note that that conflicts with we'll have to sort that out. Do we have a minimum of 13 or a minimum of 11? We'll have to sort that out with legal. A quorum for a full board is 50% plus 1 of the appointed members, and full body actions require a majority vote of those qualified, not disqualified to vote. Okay, then 43C, 3-member panel shall hear and decide appeals. 43D12, the quorum of a 3-member panel is all 3 members, 2 of 3 must concur. 43E, the full board minus the 3-member panel can decide to accept an issue for de novo hearing. You must file within 5 business days of publication of the 3-member decision. And again, that brings up the question, what constitutes publication of the 3-member decision? I'll need to get clarification. That can be an email notification the day after they meet or the day they meet or, however that works out. And we didn't speak to this earlier, but we're anticipating the 3-member panels would meet at our offices and we could arrange those much more. They still have to be noticed and still open to the public, but we figured we could do that in a conference room versus these chambers. So we figured we had some flexibility on that. The secretary must prepare correspondence and send out notices. And I spoke to this a little bit within 5 business days. Again, that was, it's not specific as to what notices are. We are assuming those to be notice of appeals or any other item that you need to take action on. And in the 5 business days, it's what triggers it. In the case of an appeal, it's probably receipt of the appeal paperwork, complete the package. In the case of other issues, when it comes to our attention, I'm not quite sure what that trigger is, but I don't think that's necessarily an issue. Then we must provide timely electronic notice and copies of decisions to the board, timely. Generally, in all the discussions we've had with legal, timely, reasonable in terms of public notice is considered to be 7 days. Timely in terms of our actions, we would think we should be able to shorten more than 7 days. But that is a question I'd like to get a little guidance on from legal. Okay, then we get into the kind of what I called the do loop. 103441, if the panel requests additional data after we've given you a packet, then we you may request it of the applicant, perhaps you request it of the department, depending on what the is that you want. That has to be 5, that request, that's what's really a difficult part, 441. Within 5 calendar days within receipt of the notice of appeal. So a person files an appeal, and then that means the board has 5 days to request more information from us from the date of the notice of the appeal. That's not going to be possible. I mean, it's not realistic, so something's got to give in this part of the ordinance. I'm not, again, sure how we're going to handle that. So that's, and again, we could get, and then we go back if the board's asked for more information, then if we can get it in time before a hearing, then that'll be fine. If we can't, then we'll have to reschedule hearings, and that can be problematic depending on when rooms are available and so on. So things to keep in mind. Then I just mentioned that we had a glitch in it on the 16 days after appointment of the 11th member. I indulged myself a little on pointing out the blatant error, but you'll have to forgive me for that. Then I go to the regulations, and this is just going through those to check what parts of the regulations may support or supplement the information that's in the ordinance. And if you go to 2310-003, meetings, it says regular meetings shall be scheduled by the secretary, should be held, it actually says 7:30 p.m. on the first and third Thursdays of each month. 6:30 is a more realistic time, so we waived that as a formality. Special meetings may be called by the chairman or by the secretary with the consent of the chairman for consideration of any business of emergency nature, similar to that we did for the meeting in February. The building board may schedule a special meeting where it feels specific action may be required. All regular and special meetings shall be open to the public. And we had further confirmation from the attorney today, and I don't have copies of that email. It came in quite late in the day, but that the public notice, under state law, reasonable public notice is, well, let me back up. Under state law, nearly all municipal board and commission meetings are open to the public. No state exemption applies to adjudicatory hearings. The very nature of this type of adjudication means the public can attend. Under state law, a reasonable public notice is required. Anchorage has a 7-day public notice rule. Dennis Wheeler brought this up to the Assembly's attention at the Assembly meeting during deliberation on the new ordinance amendments. The ordinance language allows a 5-day turnaround for staff to perform intake of the appeal. Dennis wanted to make sure the distinction between the 5-day intake period and the public notice period of 7 days under law was understood. In other words, it's not realistic for us to expect us to place the 7-day notice the minute an appeal walks in the door. And so we would need the 5 days to, process it. And then once we knew what we had our arms around, schedule a meeting and then 7 days notice. So that's information for that. AMC 2310-06, I spoke to that a bit about the case file, must include the appeal materials plus comments from staff and other agencies. If it's something that we're handling strictly in-house, that should be something we can expedite. If it's something we must go to the Department of Labor or, in some cases, the fire marshal, state fire marshal, to be sure nobody's getting crosswise, we can't speak to how fast they'll turn it around. So that could be an issue. So, again, when we get down into the timeline, we will have some overlap. We have 5 days to do the intake. Then, presuming we schedule a hearing 7 days after that point, it would still give us, or 5 business days, 7 calendar days. Then 7 days public notice, we would presumably have, 10 to 12 days to finalize the packet and still get it to you in time for you to review it. Then, as we mentioned with the other part, if you wanted additional information, we'd have to set the hearings back to get that. It would be difficult, but, in some cases it might be warranted. So then, also in 2310-013 requires that there be a formal hearing where appellant and representatives can present testimony. So that supports that it's a formal hearing, needs to be open to the public, and supports the idea that we need to give a minimum of 7-day notice on those. And then finally, one other thing I want to take up with legal in the procedures allows for reconsideration, quite similar to what the Assembly did with the ordinance. They have 24 hours after this was written without the three-member panels in mind, the procedures were, but that in any action that the board takes, they have a member can decide they want to reconsider it within 24 hours. The question is, does that apply also to the three-member panels? And we felt that it probably did. And so I've mentioned that in this timeline. So with that, I'll walk through this timeline real quick, and then we can kind of roll up our sleeves and talk through it with questions. So the legend here is day one is the day an appeal came in. The DVS Development Services. We have our understanding is we have 5 business days to do the intake, as I mentioned from the attorney's memo, which would 7 calendar days. We just presume, that's in there. So that's the first 7 days. The next, let's say we were able to finalize most of the issues, make sure we have most of the information for a packet, contact the board within this time, find the next available meeting date, and I'm sorry, the 3-member panel. Contact the 3-member panel, find out when those 3 members are all going to be available, and notice it 7 days prior to that date. Let's presume they'll all be available 7 days, from the end of the first period, then we could hear it. Their hearing could be, and I'm not sure if it would be the 14th day or the 15th day, depending on how notice. I'm not quite sure about that, but it either be allow 7 days for the notice period, the hearing on the next day, which would be the 15th day. I may be off a day one way or the other on that. So that would give us the 3-member panel hearing date. Now, one of the panel members we believe might want to do, if a panel member wanted to do reconsideration, they've had 24 hours. Then we would have to notice a new meeting, and we'd kind of go back into the loop of noticing the meeting. But concurrent with that, there's also the filing period that there's 5 business days for any party to appeal the 3-member panels, and I can't see any reason why the reconsideration and those days can't overlap. So that's another 7 days, allowing for someone to, now they might do it on the first day, but presume they ruminate on it for a while and then decide they want to do it on, they take their 7 days and decide we want to do it. Go to the full board hearing. We have to find out when the full board can meet. Either the next, it could be, depending on how the appeal filing happens, maybe we have a regular scheduled meeting coming up. We can plop it on that agenda. Maybe we have to schedule a special meeting. But on either case, we'll have to give a 7-day notice of that hearing. That puts us up to day 29 to 30, and then the hearing date. So this was a pretty busy day around the office, as Mr. Michelson knows. But this is what I was able to put together this afternoon. It's a little rough, but I think it's the bones of it. So.
Any questions from the board? Mr. Boney?
It was my interpretation that Mr. Trombley was trying to speed up the whole process, and assuming that one party or another is going to have heartburn with the panel's judgment, did we just take a 15 or 14-day process and stretch it out to 30?
That's how we see it.
And we saved money on this because now we got staff doing all this twice. Never mind.
Yes, Mr. Ferdine.
So I'm following this pretty well, except as we go from the red to green, so once there's a 3-panel meeting that staff was taking minutes on, doesn't appear to be a window in here for the results of the 3-panel meeting along with the minutes and the appropriate information to get out to the board, for then the board to have, I thought it said the board had 5 days to review that information to figure out if we wanted to do a de novo review.
Well, through the chair, if you go to 2310-10344, it says the secretary to the building board will provide timely electronic notice and copies of hearing panel decisions to the full building board. Now, I'm thinking that could be something we could easily do immediately after the three-member decision happens, either that day if they meet in lunchtime or by the next day. So I'm thinking that's not too difficult for us to meet.
Okay, well,
But in terms of providing you minutes and the information for you to decide whether or not to take it up, that would be in the notice time of scheduling. We would give you notice that there was a decision. Now, it may be that someone immediately appeals, they have up to 5 business days to appeal the decision. So it might be the very next day someone will decide to appeal, it might be 5 days. And then they decide they're going to take it forward. You know, if it's somebody who's going to hire an attorney, maybe that's, you know, something they want to think about before they do it. But so that's what the green time is the 5 business days, 7 calendar days, that's allowed for someone to decide whether or not to appeal it. Now, if they appeal it the next day, we may be able to call you and say we have an appeal. There may be, the meeting might fall just right. You know, it'll depend on how things align, that we have a meeting time, that the full board can get together, those things. But then you would get a packet, we would have to get a packet to you before we, you know, within that 7 days, which, again, I would think on a de novo hearing, there wouldn't be a lot of additional packet preparation unless the board, after they got the packet from the 3-member panel, says, well, we want some more information before we hear it. And then we kind of go back again into the 5-day loop and so on.
Ms. O'Donnell, you had a question?
After the 5 days, the filing period to request the de novo hearing, it's up to the full board to decide whether they're going to even take that. And so you have to have a meeting of the board to decide whether you're going to hear it.
Right, and that's what I was talking about in the other email from Mr. Wheeler, and Mr. Looney, I think, brought it up too. Can you hear it the same night you decide to hear it? And the answer is yes, he believes you can, but that you can, similar to reconsideration. But the reality of it is, you know, we would have to notice it as it will be taken up, it may be taken up for de novo hearing. So if it's your item, show up just in case they decide to hear it. And if they decide not to, then you showed up and then you go home.
So in reality, you could have a meeting to decide whether you're going to hear it, and then you decide that you're going to hear it
At your
2
next
weeks
meeting.
from then.
That's what Mr. Wheeler was getting to in his email. The board may want to establish a policy on that.
So this timeline really could be double
Could.
the length.
I mean, that would be something for the board to, again, I think a work session with Mr. Wheeler with the full board is probably in order. I'm sorry, through the chair?
Mr. Looney?
I guess I have a question about what can the 3-member panel decide? You know, or is it going to be affirming the appellate's case, saying, yes, we agree with your proposal, or no, or somewhere in between? And then do we have the ability to carry it over to an additional meeting if we can't resolve it in that single meeting?
That would be a good question for Mr. Wheeler, but in terms of what you can decide, basically you can decide if the building official said no or denied their request for an alternate method or modification or an interpretation of the code, that we disagree on interpretation of the code, you can review that decision and say, yes, the building official is right, or no, the building official had rocks in her head. I mean, you can go either way with that, and your standard for deciding those things is on page 3 of 7, the standards that are written in here.
Well, yeah, and I saw the standards, but I guess are we there to help the appellate, or are we there just to do a up or down vote on whether the appeal should be granted?
My understanding is, and maybe Mr. Weaver can supplement this, but that you're there as an independent look at the situation, similar, I think of you as an arbitration board almost. Right. But
And the language in the ordinance says you can grant in whole or part, so it doesn't have to be all or nothing.
And can a 3-member panel, without finding a resolution, take it to the full building board?
Yes.
I'm not sure that's written that way.
I'm not sure it's written that way. It may be possible.
It says anybody can bring it to the,
Right, but I think they have to find a decision first, or maybe their decision is we can't come to a decision and we forward it to the full board. It seems like that's a reasonable thing, but we'd have to get clarification from legal on that one, too. That's a good point.
and to bring up the, any other questions? To bring up the reconsideration, when you have a reconsideration, it can only be an individual voted in the majority vote, not the majority vote, but the pending vote. In other words, if it's
Prevailing, yeah.
prevailing. If it's a yes vote, a person that voted yes can bring it up for reconsideration. The one that was voted no cannot.
Correct, although they can bring it as an appeal, anyone can appeal it to the full board. So
Correct.
that's why I'm saying the reconsideration provisions of the procedures seem to be maybe superfluous at this point, but I'd have to talk with legal about that.
One other question as far as scheduling, I understand well, maybe I don't fully understand the noticing of the meetings, but we have in front of us a booking slip for a bunch of meetings, one every 2 weeks. Could you set up a schedule where appeals were heard on those nights every 2 weeks and minimum of 5 days in advance, providing the information to the board for any specific appeal, and otherwise it would slip to the next meeting 2 weeks later?
Through the chair, I believe we could do that. I mean, that we do have the first and third Wednesdays, as you see, scheduled out for the rest of the year, except with one or two conflicts, I think, in this chambers.
That would only facilitate having meetings happen a little faster, I think, in the process.
Right, for the full board. For the three-member panels, again, we have the flexibility to hold those at our office.
Well, I
believe, and-
just mean have, even for the three-member panels, have them scheduled in advance for every 2 weeks, and they would not happen if there was no appeal to be granted, but that way you could notice your meetings on a regular 2-week basis. I don't know if that would be a functional way of helping the scheduling of this.
Through the chair, that's a possibility. Again, I know when I was in your shoes in private practice and private construction, I couldn't say that I could be in the same place every 2 weeks at the same time. I might be in Bethel or, God forbid, Alekanuk or somewhere like that and not get back in time for a meeting.
but
So there will be logistical issues.
The flexibility of being able to call up alternates may make
Right.
that happen. I understand the spirit of this is to try and shorten some of the, the appeal process and make this something that is, helps the appellates in navigating through the system. And that's why looking at what could have been a, 2-week path is now extended to perhaps well over a month. That's kind of going backwards, but doing something like having regularly scheduled meetings that they could add and appeal to, I don't know if that would be a functional way of getting it back to the spirit of the ordinance.
To add to Mr. Looney's, you have a schedule every 2 weeks on a Thursday. Could we make it every other 2 weeks for the 3-panel meeting at your office at 10 o'clock? And that way we would, or even do it, I don't know how the board would feel, even do it morning of the same day.
We're open to suggestions. I mean, we'll kind of have to
Kind of
sort this out as we go in some respect.
Mr. Chairman, just as an aside, we really are not expecting a lot of these issues to come forward, so I'm not sure I would, it's necessary to take up a lot of the board members' times in setting these time periods for the 3-member panels, but there will be some in the next couple of
Thank you.
months, for
Mr.
sure.
Steele has a question.
I just guess I'd make a comment, and it maybe is along the lines reinforcing how often. I specifically, in the testimony at the last meeting, was addressing what the expectation for timeline was, and it seemed to be directly linked to an extreme value and cost before it would become an appeal. And I think all of the contractors that at least spoke didn't seem to bat an eye at 30 days, was a sense I got.
I don't see.
Not that 30 days was mentioned, but it was, specifically as the expectation you walk in, bells rung and you brought into a hearing room. You know, that they understood wasn't going to happen. And, you know, we were meeting with regularity every month, but no one cared to follow that process. We certainly have to deal with this, but, you know, I would be cautious to set up these regular meetings just anticipating it, because it didn't sound like it was that need.
Yeah, and I guess my intention was we wouldn't necessarily hold a regular meeting, but they would be scheduled and essentially canceled if there was no interest or no appeals that would happen. I just threw it out as an idea that would, you know, hopefully shorten this increasing timeline. But personally, I don't look forward to going to meetings every 2 weeks that nobody else is going to be at.
If I might just respond, I agree that we should be providing a service, but at the same time, I think an appeal, at least my experience on it, people want answers much sooner, and I just don't think that this board can effectively give you that kind of response just because of its nature. And the process is set up for, you know, kind of public noticing, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know the intent of Mr. Trombley in terms of if his expectation was it going to be much briefer than this. But to set up those meetings for the hearing panel, at least, we're talking about scheduling 3 people, and you have anywhere from 8 to 12 backup members to fill out a meeting time. So I guess I would just be cautious to try to establish some prescribed time periods for that.
I think it's going to be a learning experience for everybody, staff, this board, everybody. And I think we're going to make changes as the year goes on. I think we're going to realize some things work, some things don't. I think as we have the first appeal or second appeal, I think the board members are going to realize that something may have been done more proficiently. And I think that we're just going to have to make suggestions. And I just think it's a big learning curve, and I think it's going to just take time. Does staff agree with that? And we're going to, I mean, whatever we make, whatever decisions the board makes tonight could be altered, could be changed.
Mr. Chair, that I agree with you in concept. We do have the requirement that our job is to do things the way the code tells us to do them. We can be held to task if we don't follow our own codes. And in the cases where we haven't necessarily enforced the code properly, we at times are, chastised for that. So we have to try to follow the procedures here as closely as we can, but because the procedures are kind of mixed up, we are going to have to figure it out as we go.
Any other discussion? It seems like I think we should just continue having an open, no sense closing anything and then having a motion. But unless one of the board members suggests doing that, I'd like to go back to your document that you handed out on the numbers, because I sit here and I keep going back to it every so often, Ms. Walsh, and I see where you're coming up with 13, but that item number 9, and I don't know if it was supposed to say 2 or up to 2, but even if it remains up to 2, and I forget that's on page 4 of 7, so you have 13 with the 1 through 8, and number 9 just gives you up to 2, so you could keep it at 13, or you could have 1 additional experienced individual for 14, or you could have 2 additional experienced individuals for 15. So
I agree. It's a housekeeping issue in that other areas in this ordinance, it puts the lower threshold as 11, and we just need to clean that up because with this composition here, the lower threshold has to be defined as 13.
that is correct.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
that I'll
my
agree
point.
with you on. So we have to push the mayor, and nothing's going to happen until after the elections, obviously, but we have to push the mayor to at least appoint 2 more, if not
More general
4.
contractors, looks like.
Looks like 2 more general contractors, you're correct. Because all the other are filled, correct? All the other requirements?
I believe so.
Yes, Ms. O'Donnell?
I have a quick question about item number 5 there. It says 4 members shall be licensed general contractors actively engaged in building construction, and at least 2 of the 4 shall be actively engaged in home building, whereas every other requirement requires you to have a license. They're not saying that they're requiring a licensed residential endorsement for the general contractor. I think it's presumed, but it's not stated.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Walsh, but I don't think you can be a general contractor, but you can't be a home builder without a residential endorsement.
True. And what do you, I'm assuming you're defining home builder by new construction.
I assume that, not remodeler. I didn't put that in there, so I don't know what is it.
I was confused. as to the
I'd agree
intent.
with, through the chair, I'd agree with Ms. O'Donnell's take that it's 4 general contractors, and at least 2 of those 4 have to have a residential endorsement. Or no, it's not just having an endorsement, that's your business as you build homes. It may be, maybe you're Osborne Construction and you're building military housing, but you're building homes.
Right.
You know.
And I would submit that if you have a residential endorsement, that means you're getting continuing education in the codes relevant to your business practice. And
Like 16 hours every 2 years.
exactly. And I think that's relevant. So I know it says home building, but you don't get a license for home building.
I think that could be vetted during the selection of the additional members. For example, Mr. Michelson and yourself also are licensed general contractors that have a residential endorsement and are actively building homes. So we could say that we've already got those 2 and we need 2 other just regular general contractors.
Well, that would not be correct for myself. We are a general contractor with a residential endorsement. However, our primary focus is commercial construction, and we do not
Okay.
do new construction, so.
So we would need an additional member that it was home builder.
Correct. I mean, if the intent is somebody that performs new residential construction, we do participate in continuing education, the 16 hours. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out, is the focus is somebody who's performing new construction?
That's the way I thought it was, but maybe not. Could be larger. or could be
So
remodeling.
many of the cases that come before us are remodeling issues. I think it would be correct to allow a remodeler, but that's something to take up with the mayor who's going to be appointing these people.
Because I agree, I do think it's a huge issue when you're talking about things that you're contesting possibly because you've got existing conditions in an existing structure that you're going to be addressing, and you've got a code interpretation for something that's new code versus something that's existing. And you're going to encounter that when you have remodeling. So I think that is poorly worded and might not get you the right composition of this board.
Mr. Weaver may want to speak to this, but I would think that suggest that the board, one of the things that's going to happen is additional members need to be appointed, and I would suggest that the board could put that in the form of a motion or recommendation to the mayor when he's appointing these people to keep that in mind for these additional positions, and that would probably solve it.
Well, nothing's going to happen until next week, so, and then it'll take a couple weeks after that to shake out all the news. I agree with Ms. O'Donnell, but I could probably say that 95% of the new home builders in the last 3 years, due to our economy, are dabbling in the residential remodeling business also, so.
Agreed. I have one other question.
Go
or
ahead.
comment. As to the composition of the board, we are tasked with, on these reviews, with making sure that we're conforming with best practices as to life safety, including fire safety. Yet there's no requirement, is the composition of the board to include a fire systems contractor.
I think, who's our mechanical contractor? You do any fire suppression? No fire suppression.
And I think that it's relevant to be able to make informed decisions, especially if it's something that is going to a panel, that we have somebody, I understand we might have somebody that is an engineer with those specifications, however, there's no contractor.
And I think Ms. Walsh is going to tell you that's another thing that we should address with the mayor and Mr. Baker.
The other suggestion would be that item 9, the 2 additional members by experience or training in any of the above listed disciplines, trades, or professions. I would think that a fire systems contractor could be considered a mechanical contractor, and so you could again note that.
And you might want to note, Ms. Walsh, another one under those 2, under item 9, might be an individual specialized in dirt works, because there could be some issues with foundations and ground and stuff like that coming up. So it might be, those 2 people might be one fire suppression and one actively engaged in excavation, road building, paving, or something along those lines.
That, I might suggest that might be something, might be something to take up also at the sunset time, to another chance to change those particular parts of it. As you've observed, I think, through this process, you have to go back to the assembly to change code. Making that happen, I have one I've been working on for 15 months, and it started out as a simple exchange of responsibilities from one person to another, and I still don't have that through the assembly yet. We're on about our 8th postponement. So it is difficult. You need to kind of choose your battles, choose your time, and then go for all your changes at once. It's just,
What be the pleasure of the board? Do you want to start making suggestions?
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
sorry, Mr. Fredine?
I'd like to make a motion that the appointments of, are you referring to the, well, I'll just get this motion out of the way. As far as the 3 panel groupings, if we're supposed to do that, I'd like to add that to the agenda under new business, under item E, for appointment of the 3 panels.
So you want to put it on the new business on the E?
Correct. If we are indeed supposed to do that tonight.
There's one question I'd like to ask the board. We've been kind of doing a little bit informal. Does the board wish, because normally when we have a board meeting, we actually close a section, and then we discuss amongst the board, and then we make motions. Is the board comfortable with doing it as we're doing it, more of a roundtable effect for procedural purposes, Mr. Bode?
I don't see where we're being asked to make a motion to adopt anything here, though, so I don't think we have
No,
to
but
do anything like
That
that.
was actually going to be my question, was what, this has been a very educational, and I think it's important we've had this discussion. I'm not really sure if we're here to decide anything or vote on anything, or just, kind of understand this.
Oh, I think Ms. Walsh wanted to walk out of here with designation of the 3-person panels. I think,
I believe the ordinance requires us to do that tonight.
so there's some things that we're
Right,
being
we can
asked to
do
do.
Well,
that, but I don't think we need.
Technically, the ordinance required us to do it 16 days after the appointment of the most recent member, whenever that was.
Yeah,
But
well, that
again, that's an error,
last
so.
October or last November, so.
So I don't think it'll take that long, so we just need to, the board's going to need to decide what kind of panels they want to make, and, well, it's, the chair and I are supposed to set it, but it seems to me more practical to have buy-in from the people on the various
A
panels.
lot of intelligence sitting at this
Yeah.
I'll
podium, so.
second Mr. Fredine's motion, which was.
Would you like to repeat the motion, please, Mr.
Motion
Fredine?
is to add to the agenda new business item E.
And that'd be selection of 3-panel boards, or 3-panel committees, right?
Yes, sir.
Is that how you second?
Yep.
Mr. Looney seconds it. Any discussion on that? Seeing none. All in favor, say by aye.
Aye.
That passes. Okay, so we'll do that. Well,
And then, if I can make. a
Yes.
motion that we close discussion on item D.
I don't think we need a motion for that at this time. The chair chooses to close discussion on item D, taking it up with the board.
And if I may ask for a statement from the board, would you like to have a work session with Mr. Wheeler to talk about?
I'm going to
some of
get to that in a second there. Thank you, Ms. Walsh. So D is closed. I'd like to, so we have a motion, it's been approved, item D. Does someone want to take a stab at comprising the three, the way I see it is if there's a mechanical issue, obviously, we're going to want Mr. Merchant there. And who's the mechanical engineer? Mr. Gray, Mr. Fredine, and Mr. Gray and Mr. Merchant. Would that be, is everybody in agreement with that being the mechanical? Electrical issue, so do you have that written
I'm
down?
sorry, could you repeat that?
It sounds like Mr. Gray,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Fredine, and Mr. Merchant
Okay,
would be, I guess, mechanical issues. Electrical issues would be Mr. Looney, I assume, Mr. Bringman, and who's the electrical contractor? And Ms. O'Donnell. Does the
Mr.
bo-
Chair, if I may, if I can find my handy-dandy Robert Rules of thingamajiggies that I was just reading. Something about the agenda, whatever that one was. So D was officers and E was three-panel, so we're skipping ahead on the
You're
agenda.
correct. You want to do the officers first? We can do that. I have no problem with that.
I don't know what the appropriate name is, so I should be doing that.
I was just trying to get
Call
us
for
out of here
agenda
before
or something like
9:30.
that.
Point of order is well taken. Do you want to defer that? You want to do it now? It doesn't matter. I'm just trying to get us out of here at 9:30. So if we go to item D, which was A, it's election of the new officers, chair and vice chair for the 2012-2013 year. I seek the chair request motions for those positions.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Steele.
I would like to make a motion to nominate Scott Boney as the chair.
Okay.
I'll second.
Motion's been made and second. Any discussion? Mr. Merchant?
I'd like to make a motion to chair sustain.
And that's been motioned and seconded. Well, I can't have, well,
You can.
okay. So we have Scott Boney as chair, myself as chair. Does someone have a motion for, any other motions for chair? How about vice chair?
Move to close nominations for chair.
Nominations for chair is closed. We have Mr. Boney and myself. I guess we can do a hand vote or sealed vote on it. It doesn't matter to me. What does the board prefer?
Call for ballot.
Call for ballot. Those that would like Mr. Boney as chair, please raise their hand.
Excuse me, private ballot, please.
Private ballot. You want private ballot? We don't have a voting machine here, do we?
No, we don't.
We have
We
paper
have
though,
hanging
don't we?
chads probably
We
somewhere.
do.
Can we cut up some paper?
Oh, I think I can rip some up here. We need
Matt,
11?
and cut up a colorful chart, we have lots of those.
Oh, I think I can get 11 sheets here.
I'll get them tomorrow. He is making.
I'm just making 11 here. Nine, 10. And there's 11.
I think just chair.
It's just chair, yes.
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, you want to add them up?
I will. Okay, the vote is Mr. Michelson, 4, Mr. Boney, 7?
Congratulations, Mr. Boney. I'll hand you over the chair right now. It's been a pleasure to work with you guys, and I'll swap seats with you. And I appreciate all your time and effort.
And thank you, Mr. Michelson.
Thank you.
And you can take over the vote and make vice chair.
All right, thank you. And with that, let's open up nominations for vice chair, please. Any nominations from the floor?
I'd like to nominate Mr. Michelson.
Mr. Steele?
Chair, I'd like to nominate Mr. Feller.
This is the first board that I've sat on, and although it is my second term, we've only had a handful of meetings, and I'm going to decline the nomination. I don't feel that I have the experience to run a meeting at this point.
Mr. Chairman, with that heard, if I could offer another name, I'd like to nominate Mr. Ferdine.
Mr. Chair, my term expires in October, so I'm unsure if I can accept that, and then at that time, that would be dropped off, and then we have to do a new vote at that point in time, or would that?
The board sunsets in October.
Well, it is 2012 after all. Hell, everything must be done here in a couple months. I guess I will accept if that is the case.
Okay. Any other names?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, so I understand we have no nominations, or Mr. Ferdine still?
We have Mr. Ferdine.
Okay, thank you.
Any other names?
I move we close the nomination process.
Call to close. With one on, excuse me? Non-contested, can we just by vote say aye for, if you accept Mr. Ferdine as vice chair?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Mr. Ferdine is in.
Thank you.
Let's see, that puts us to 7E, meaning being the three-person panels. We've kind of offered names for mechanical and electrical. If we accept those, we can keep moving on toward, how do you recommend we structure this? Adding structural, residential, and architectural is what I wrote. Do you have any other suggestions, staff?
That, we could definitely do that. That would take you up to 5 panels. Someone may have to serve on 2 panels, but I don't see any reason that that can't be done that way. So you said architectural, structural, and Residential?
Would,
Or, go ahead.
question, Chair, would mechanical also do plumbing?
I would assume so. That's what was my thought. Do we, isn't necessarily to break residential separate from architectural? Or do we want to leave those together?
Well, I think the structural and architectural are, pretty straightforward. I think the question to ask ourselves is, what would the residential one hear that any of the other ones wouldn't?
That's what I was coming up with too, yeah.
Or, and perhaps there's one for general civil site work type issues, but those usually don't come under Title 23. So there is fill and grade. Fill and grade might be a lovely panel to have.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Might I suggest you have 3 randomly selected panels?
Instead of specialized panels?
I think, yeah, I do.
Well, the intent is that it be in a particular discipline. And we don't need to have 5 panels either. We up to 5 panels. So perhaps do, and I believe we could establish another panel later when you, A, get more members, or B, feel the need for it. So maybe the thing to do, it's a suggestion, but since it is supposed to be the chair and me doing this, do a structural and architectural, and then you can set up another panel later date if you think you need it. I mean, we're kind of learning this as we go.
Mr. Fredine?
Just clarification, based on some of the previous testimony from the residential contractors, number one, it'd be kind of nice to know what are some of the issues that are coming up in the field that are coming to the board. But I remember hearing one of them had to deal with life safety, fire items, which I guess that would fall under the purview of the architectural, would be the best to adjudicate those? Okay.
Or you could have an at-large panel that could be used for, some of the administrative type issues that might come up.
I think basically what it would be is you would have a building structural and a building non-structural. And the building non-structural would kind of be your architectural panel, or? Most of your issues, from what I see, will probably be structural issues, whether they're residential or commercial, they're structural.
Board? One of my concerns with the way this was written is by putting together names up front, a lot of these individuals are professionals that travel frequently and makes it very difficult to pull that particular board together.
True, but it does give us the option to swap people out.
Right, it does give us the option, and that's where I'm kind of wrestling with kind of what Ross says, that do we try to populate small groups, or do we just kind of pull together the most appropriate available when it becomes a meeting time?
Mr. Chairman, as I read the item 1, which it says up to 5 hearing panels, and it doesn't say it's up to 5. Hearing panels should be established at the first meeting, so we have to do it now. We can't establish panels later. Calendar year to hear appeals from decisions of the administrative and other enforcement. Secretary to the board, and the board shall assign members to a specific panel and may request members take the place of regular. So we conceivably could set up just an interior and exterior or structural and non-structural panel, and populate each with 6 to 8 people, that only 3 members would be chosen for any specific panel evaluation. I mean, members of this board would be assigned to a panel, but that would take care of, if people are traveling, you always have a pool of about 8 people to pick from, and really under the ability of the building official to pick replacements, you really have the whole board that can serve on any one of the 2 panels, which to me gives the greatest flexibility, because you really ought to pick for each individual appeal the right people for to hear the appeal, rather than try and set up 5
Right.
panels with specific, electrical or mechanical. I think that's going to be harder to administer.
Mr. Boney, I think do you want to go ahead?
For what it's worth, Mr. Chair, my suggestion would be to go ahead and set up the three-member panels and to include a structural and architectural, and then swap them out as you need to on a case-by-case basis. But go ahead and set these four up now, and then you should have everything pretty much addressed.
Being mechanical, electrical, structural, architectural, was that your recommendation?
Mechanical, electrical, structural, architectural.
Okay.
And then I might add, I don't think the ordinance would preclude us from designating alternates, pool of alternates.
Mr. Gray?
Mr. Chairman, if I'm not mistaken, in the verbiage in the ordinance, it does state that your expertise must be included in that three-member panel.
And what we're wrestling with is, let's say we have an issue that comes up, again, where running a conduit a certain way is interfering with a structural piece of, work. Is it a structural issue? Is it an electrical issue? For some reason, that conduit's got to go where it's got to go. So there may be times when it's appropriate to have a mix of disciplines. So I don't think we need to get too bogged down in that, because it gives us the option to swap people out if we need to for technical expertise. I think it would be good to have the basic disciplines, the panels organized by discipline. I think that was the intent of the author of the ordinance as well. But I don't think we need to get too wigged out about it. It gives us all the options to, when we have an issue before us, to adjust the panel as we need to. You say wigged out on the record, probably.
Just to keep populating a little bit, under structural, we do have two structural engineers on the panel. That's Mr. Feller and Mr. Straight. Under architectural, we do have two architects. There's Mr. Steele and myself. That kind of leaves Mr. Michelson in kind of a man without a land here. And, well, we had talked about her for electrical earlier, but that general contractor. So maybe if we've got two per, and then we've got Miss O'Donnell and Mr. Michelson is kind of pools to float with above and beyond, does that meet the intent, and does the board agree with that?
Okay, we would have, Ms. O'Donnell would be is already serving on a panel. Mr. Michelson, and he can speak to this himself, but he would have expertise who would be appropriate in some cases on either structural or non-structural. So he could choose one or both if he likes. That's an option if he's willing to serve on both. Someone's going to have to serve on both, because you have 11 members and 12, this needs 12 three-member panels. So
Yeah, we had, the recommendation there was Miss O'Donnell would also be in that same
right, so
structural, non-structural.
that would mean that she would be electrical and one
Not
of the others.
necessarily electrical. You've got Mr. Looney and Mr. Brigham together, and then
So you're
a
saying we
third.
designate the third member of the structural and non-structural as either one of these people that be determined at the time the panel convenes for an issue?
Or from the remaining 9 people, really, as needed.
I don't think it precludes us from doing that, do you? I don't think, that makes sense.
I think the ordinance actually encourages that, because it tells you that you can swap people out as needed to have the expertise on the panel.
So in other words, structural, the home panels, the people we've named specifically, that would be calling their home panels, and then Mr. Michelson and Ms. O'Donnell are agreeing to be floaters and fillers as needed, presumably on structural, non-structural, but possibly on the others.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The way I'm reading this is you need to assign 3 members to each panel. And then, obviously, there are some of us that will need to serve as alternates or be willing to serve as alternates for multiple panels. Because if these things happen like that and there are 2 people gone, you're going to have multiple alternates available and willing. So I think you have to set the 3, and everybody else is designated an alternate.
Right.
But that's where I think you could set up 2 panels is all you need to set up. and then, rotate people in as out, as they're appropriate for that particular hearing. But I don't think we need to get any more complex than that. Just
Well, Mr. Boney, I'm going to exercise the license that the ordinance gives me, that it is you and I, the chair and the secretary that establish these panels. And the other discussions are well taken, but speaking from a practicality standpoint, the person that's going to have to call those panels together, it would be preferable if we had a basic panel structure set up. Then I have a place to start when I have to start calling a panel, and then consult with you if I need to fill out another spot. So from where I'm sitting, it would make life a bit more efficient if we had specific panels established.
Fair enough.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
just as a comment, the way I'm reading this, it says we have to set up the panels, but it doesn't say we have to assign people to the panels today. So it is possible to,
Good point.
it is possible to designate some panels, and then as issues come up, yourself and the secretary to the board can then
catch.
assign people.
Doesn't necessarily address Ms. Welsh's problem, though, of having to call the third. Does
Mr.
it?
Chair? I mean, if we just set up the 4 panels that we're talking about, electrical, mechanical, structural, architectural, assign 3 people to each, and then when an appeal comes in, we're basically going to choose the 3 most qualified people that are available to serve on that panel. And I think I think it could work that way. But to have 4 panels with 3 people on each panel satisfies the requirement of the ordinance.
I would agree with Mr. Feller on that. Let's just name some names and get on with it.
So we have Ms. O'Donnell and Mr. Michelson that would you like to volunteer for a position or be volunteered for a position, I guess, is the options.
At your mercy, Mr. Chair.
That's a non-answer.
Well, one will go on the architectural panel and one will go on the structural panel.
With all due respect, I would prefer the architectural panel, feel more comfortable.
Then that would put Mr. Michelson on the structural panel, which I think is entirely appropriate. So with that, I think, Mr. Chair, our work is done on that one.
Electrical has 2 of 3 on there.
Oh, I had Ms. O'Donnell also on electrical from our previous discussion,
You
but
want to keep that one? Okay. I saw her head nod. I assume that was an agreement. Okay. So, mechanical is Ferdine, Merchant, and Gray. Electrical is Looney, Brigham, and O'Donnell. Structural is Feller, Straight, and Michelson. Architectural is Boney, Steele, and O'Donnell. Did I understand that correctly?
I believe we were using the term non-structural, but, non-structural / architectural. I mean, non-structural could be anything that's not structural, so maybe, building non-structural is how you said it, right?
Okay.
Building non-structural. Yeah. Okay, well, let's go with architectural just to keep the distinction a little more clear.
All right.
Mr. Chair, and I would volunteer for Ms. Walsh's request of landfill, soil conditions,
Feeling great?
non-structural elevation issues.
I will say that, many of you may not see it, but fill and grade issues are some of our more contentious issues. So, and it is part of Title 23, so it would be appropriate to have a panel for fill and grade.
I think Ms. O'Donnell would be, no?
I think the civil engineers would be appropriate, and a general contractor.
Yeah, I would volunteer for that one.
They can, but that's true. We could designate structural also to be fill and grade. That solves it right there. Or, yeah, we could do it that way. Although, on thinking it through, they are different animals. I mean, one's inside the 5-foot line, one's outside the 5-foot line. Not always, though. No, that's true. Yeah, they do. Yeah, you're right. Yep. I think Mr. Knopfinger, I remembered your name tonight, is correct. Actually, the structural committee could take on the fill and grade issues, so perhaps we don't need a special designation for that.
And then you've already got Filler and Michelson on that one, so.
Right, so I think that settles out quite properly. But I think it is helpful to designate that as the structural and fill and grade.
So noted. Anything else? Is there a reason to vote on that?
No, because you and I are the ones who decide this. So how do you feel about it? You good?
I'll abstain.
All right, the panels are established and the contributions of the board are appreciated.
That concludes new business. Any reports that,
Oh, with that said, I will say that the appeal that is pending, although it's not, the application is not complete, and there's some technical things we have to remind the applicant to do, like pay his fee and sign the application form, but when that's done, that will be a structural issue. That'll be our first one.
If I can just mention one other issue with this ordinance. Craig, and you might be able to correct me, when is the structural engineering license going to be adopted in the state of Alaska? Is that?
The structural license is actually in effect as of today. It was 30 days after the lieutenant governor signed it, and that was back in the February meeting of the ALS board. So it is in effect. Technically, we have no structural engineers unless either of you guys are SE. No, actually, no, not. But minor point, but you won't have any full-fledged structural engineers until, what's the next board meeting? April? The April board meeting, you might be getting some comedy applications.
So, but my suggestion is that this ordinance ought to include a member of this board to be a structural engineer.
To staff, that's an excellent point. Can we have quote-unquote licensed structural, or we actually have civil engineers in the ordinance, so we're okay to have our current members on the board, whether they have an SE or not. They're still licensed civil engineers, so they're okay to be on the board still. Sorry.
the way everything's written right now, it is 2 registered civil engineers. It does not specify as structural or as soil type civils. It's open. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, so Mr. Looney, was your request more for those 2 additional members that are coming onto the board to be a licensed SE?
Well, you know, I didn't bring it up as a motion or anything, but I just think that it needs to be looked at fairly quickly, that this board probably ought to have a licensed structural engineer on it, whether it's the 2 additional ones or if we just have 1 civil, 1 structural would probably be the most pragmatic. And it doesn't keep us from keeping the 2 existing civils and just adding another structural to fill that role, because you do have the item 9, which allows 2 others of whatever we need.
Again, I would recommend that the sunsetting time in October would be a good time to address all those issues. By then, it sounds like some of the structural stuff will be shaken out as well. And while we're on that, if I could ask for the record, why don't we change the name of the structural fill grade panel, structural/civil panel? That'll accommodate the fill and grade issue.
Does this have to go before the assembly to make
No,
revision?
we get to make up our own names, so we have power over something, let's use it. So structural civil, we'll call that, or civil structural. And that'll mesh in nicely with the members right now as well. Any objection to that?
I like to have the diversity of being able to grab structurals or civils, who's ever going to be volunteering for the board personally.
So,
Comments? Hearing none. Reports. Can you give us an update of what's happening at the building safety counter?
We need more staff at the front counter.
Hiram, take it out
Really
of
bad.
our pay here for this.
Downtown doesn't listen to us.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, we did, in first quarter budget revision, ask for a counter person to be included in this year's budget, so I think tomorrow they're going to be making those decisions.
Permit count and valuations.
Oh, things are picking up. We actually had $100,000 worth of permit fees come in on Tuesday alone, which was a big day. Yeah, that was just fees. I mean, it was millions of dollars worth of work that came in. And there's some big projects in there, the UAA sports facilities in, and there's a new Sam's Club in with filling station, and commercial-wise, it's starting to look like a good solid year right now.
an interesting one that just came in was tenant improvements on the, I think it's 901 East 9th, or the Shell Oil, Chevron, the building on 9th and L at the Park Strip, that all 10 floors being renovated. My understanding is the tenant's going to be Nana Construction. Nana. So that was an interesting one. Be nice to see that building occupied again.
With that kind of activity, what is permit review time now?
Not too bad now. It's like the wave is building, and we're still riding it. So, yeah, I mean, we're still looking probably in the 3 weeks out range on a lot of, for plumbing, mechanical, electrical, structural, architectural reviews on commercial work. But this is right about now, heading into April, is when things normally really pick up and we really start suffering. But
I thought last time, or recently when we met, you were short an inspector. Do I remember that correctly?
Last year, we brought on a temporary structural inspector that helped out. We had some long-term leaves that were taken and some medical issues. And we had talked about reinstituting that this year, and determination, talking to Chief of Inspections, is that some of those other issues had been resolved, and they felt they wanted to attempt to work with the present personnel. We always look at how much overtime we're going to have to pay versus, whether it makes sense to bring on another person, and they felt in this case it'd be more cost-effective to stick with our current staff. So that's the read at present time.
Any other questions for staff? Hearing none. Audience participation, I don't think we'll have any problems moving past that one. Board member comments?
As an ex officio member of the board, I guess I can make a comment. Could we get a read on the feeling about having a work session with Mr. Wheeler on this ordinance? I think it would be helpful. What I would intend to do is take to him all these issues that we identified tonight and the chart plus the other stuff that came up, some good comments, and tell him that, does the board want a sit down with him? We'll have to notice it. We could probably do it at the mayor's conference room, and he could go through, answer all these questions, or would you rather he just answer them via email, something like that?
My personal preference would be a work session that, not necessarily mandatory that you need to be there, but I'd like to hear more, be able to ask the questions, get the direct answers. And I see a few nods. Mr. Ferdine.
I would agree that would be very nice, and what would be even better is if we were to submit the questions in advance to him, so we aren't, we give him time to make the appropriate references that he has to on state and local requirements.
Well, then I would propose that I'll summarize all these issues and send that to the chair, and on his agreement, we'll forward it to Mr. Wheeler and request a work session to address the items. If I can ask Ms. Klender, would we then, I noticed on our time that we have the mayor's conference room on the, what, could you just,
No, the mayor's conference room is basically the room where the sandwich.
oh, okay. A different mayor's conference room. Do we have to pay for that one too?
No.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. It's the mayor's
of the
conference room south. All right, got it. Well, we could have the work session at our office in one of our bigger conference room. Would the board prefer like a midday time session or an evening session?
I don't see a lot of hands throwing up here.
Midday?
Midday?
Okay,
I see more nods that way. Sounds like midday.
we'll get that going.
It'd be interesting to do the first couple of appeals and then have another opportunity to talk with him or even have him at the first appeal or two.
We can talk to him about that or bring it up at the work session that we'd request him to be there. This first appeal, again, we're entering this timeline here, but what I have to do with it is go back and see when I took the action to tell him. I'm not sure that's defined. There's lots of conversations out in the hallway, and I'm not sure what we're going to choose as the date of the action when we said, no, you have to do it this way. So I got to do a little research on that and work with him a little bit to come up with an application that works. But